Chapter 12:22. Bossly Bossly. They were about to meet their idol. So excited. However, after looking for a long time, they did not see anyone. The group of people turned their heads to look in other directions. The 20 members of Team 1 were also looking around nervously, thinking that they actually had the chance to see Boss Li Nanheng, who was sitting on the steps next to Team 1, raised his eyebrows indifferently and glanced at Ah Feng, who was deliberately stirring up trouble. Feng Ling also stood rooted to the ground, but her eyes were calm as she looked at the group of people from Team 1. As she was standing far away, she could see the gazes of Li Nanheng, who had been sitting there calmly and casually at the same time. This day would come sooner or later. Today was indeed the most appropriate day. She just didn't know if the 20 idiots under her would be able to take this stimulation. After all, a few days ago these people had cursed their boss behind his back. They secretly hated him for being too ruthless, too heavy-handed, and too cold. He didn't give them any face at all. Li Nanheng was still sitting there, as if he didn't want to steal the limelight from these newcomers today. Every few years the base would have to change new blood. In the future, 11 base would only be stronger than the previous generation. From the Deputy Drill Master of Team 1 and Team 2. At this moment, Ah Feng turned his gaze to the man sitting on the stairs and said with a smile, "Boss Li, you seem to be reluctant to part with your identity as a Deputy Drill Master, don't you? Why don't we continue to recruit a batch of newcomers for you to train after this batch of newcomers is over? That way you won't have to hide your identity and be an assistant drill master." In order to prevent the two teams' newbies from being too unbalanced after their identities were exposed, Li Nanheng also took the time to appear a few times in Team 2. He was equivalent to the deputy drill master of the two teams. Before Ah Feng finished speaking, the eyes of the two teams of rookies instantly turned to the man sitting in the most inconspicuous position. Almost in an instant, everyone looked in Nanheng's direction. Their eyes were filled with shock, disbelief, fear, and tears of regret for their poor performance in front of Boss. There were also all kinds of strange gazes. Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly, got up and walked down the stairs. When he was about to reach Ah Feng, he passed by Feng Ling intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, the seniors in the base knew that he did it on purpose, but the newbies didn't understand. When he passed by Feng Ling, he glanced at her, and Feng Ling also looked at him silently. Even if it was just a glance, he could see the joy and calmness in her heart at this moment. She was happy that her hard work paid off and she finally won. She was calm because the newbies of the two teams were all fresh blood that the base needed most in the future. Winning or losing was just a game. She wouldn't be proud of such a narrow victory. "I've been in the hospital for a few days and just came back today. I'm sitting quietly in the crowd. Can't you let me have a good rest?" Li Nanheng glanced at him unkindly before taking the microphone from Ah Feng's hand. Ah Feng chuckled. "It's just a matter of a few words. Boss, 1 word from you is worth 10 words from us. You're better at boosting morale than me." "Boosting morale?" Li Nanheng sneered, picked up the microphone and said expressionlessly, "Just a few seconds ago the person in charge of the base hall, Ah Feng, the second in command of 11 base, asked me to say a few words to boost morale." "Morale? You have any?" "Ah Feng, everyone, although the results of today's assessment matches have come out, I don't want to comment on everyone's performance, nor do I want to recall those terrible assessment standards, especially the members of Team 2. They could have played a better advantage to fight, but they didn't even show 70% of their ability. What? Do you think coming to 11 base is like playing house? Can you put on a formal uniform with just a few moves on this training ground?" The whole field was silent. Including the drill masters and newcomers, there were nearly 100 people, but at this time, it was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Li Nanheng's eyes coldly swept across the group of newcomers of the two teams who were still shocked and didn't dare to move or make a sound. "I haven't been in the base recently, and I haven't been supervising the training of the members of the two teams. What I can't believe is that I've been out for so many days and finally took the time to come back today, but I didn't see anyone make progress. Instead they regressed. If I were the referee today, let alone the two teams, you wouldn't even have a place. Do you know why 11 base is called 11 base? X represents perfection in sociology, but it means unknown in numbers. I means impregnable, unbreakable, and indestructible. Impregnable is the purpose of the base. Every member of the base must have the ability to stand on his own. This place is not a place where a coward can easily gain a foothold. But even if everyone strives to become stronger, they have to bear the responsibility. They will face unknown dangers in a certain mission at any time and any place. If there is even the slightest mistake or weakness in hand speed, it will give the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of, and they will die a graveless death. Why did you enter 11 base? Just because people who go out from here can gain a foothold in the sphere of influence of the military and the police? Or is it because the title of 11 base makes you look good? You are superior to others wherever you go? Or you just want to find a place to stay for a few years? Where do you think this is? A university? An overcrowded kindergarten? Or do you think the reputation of 11 base is just a rumor that a group of hooligans can easily stand here and be fooled? I don't have any encouraging words. I only have one thing to say. Open your eyes and see clearly what is the difference between this land and the outside world. Don't wait until you pay with your life and blood before you regret it. Those who have the ability stay, and those who don't, get out. The audience was still silent, but no one looked dissatisfied, including Ah Feng, who originally wanted Boss Lee to support them. At this moment he no longer had a joking expression and stood aside solemnly. Feng Ling stood quietly and listened. Li Nanheng never spoiled anyone. Even though he said that he had been paying attention to her when she first entered the base, even though she was thinner than others, he had never been soft-hearted to her. If she wanted to stay in the base and wanted to live, she had to become stronger so that the enemy would not have a chance to take advantage of her. What the base needed was brave new blood, not a few nameplates hanging in front of the base hall. What they needed were brothers who could fight bravely, not burdens who would die on the battlefield. Chapter 12:23. Those who have the ability to stay, and those who don't have the ability to scram. These words sounded simple, but they contained a strong deterrent and warning. Indeed, in order to establish a foothold in the base, in addition to the ability to fight, one also had to have the ability to withstand psychological pressure. Take Veram's method for example. If Li Nanheng were to deal with this matter, he would have kicked him out of the base before he made any movements. He would not have given him any chance to struggle at all. Although it seemed ruthless, in a place like 11 base, the word 11 was the dividing line between life and death. No one would spoil anyone. Those who were too delicate, too cowardly, too emotional, and even dragged down the entire team's performance because of their personal reasons, had no chance of staying in the base. Li Nanheng did not say it clearly, but it could be considered as an invisible slap in the face for some newcomers. Li Nanheng did not say anything more and ended his words with the word, scram. He threw the microphone back into Ah Feng's hand and turned to leave. As he left, he reached out and suddenly hugged Feng Ling. Not only did he leave, but he also took Feng Ling away. Feng Ling was about to break free, but the man had already hugged her in public. Right now, even if she jumped hundreds of meters away, she could not block the scene that had been seen by everyone. Originally, the matter between her and Li Nanheng had been spread by the newcomers. Now, wasn't he clearly telling the newcomers that she was his woman? She turned to look at him. Li Nanheng received her gaze but did not let go. Ignoring the group of trash behind him, he brought her away from the training ground and casually held her hand. As he held it in his hand, he suddenly glanced at her. Why is your hand so cold? You scared me. Now that there was no one around, she could only give up and stop struggling. She only said, I thought you really planned to cancel all the candidates for this assessment. After all, they have been training for so long. Their recent emotional outbursts probably have something to do with me. First of all, I'm a woman and they didn't believe me from the beginning. Later, although they accepted me, I was in the hospital for a while and didn't come back for a few days, so they thought the matter was complicated. I've been thinking about Jin Wan and didn't have the mood to comfort them, so it led to some people's extreme emotions today. But in the end, they have already worked very hard. It's all my fault. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the candidates is really too serious. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the quota is really too serious. Seeing that the man only looked at her and did not speak, Feng Ling quickly grabbed his sleeve with her other hand. Before the next assessment, the training time that should end at 4 o'clock every day will be extended by 3 hours. After dinner, they will train from 6:30 to 9:30. How about that? As she spoke, she looked at him eagerly. No matter what, they are all people I brought up. I can slowly get used to their temperament and character. Give them another chance and leave the quota for them. Seeing that the little woman's eyes gradually softened, Li Nanheng's eyes gradually smiled. Are you begging me? Seeing him smile, Feng Ling knew that he was only smiling at her. He was probably still not satisfied with the group of newcomers. She also knew where those people were wrong and what they were sure about, but after getting along with them for a month, she understood their strengths and weaknesses very well. She believed that before the next assessment she would definitely be able to make them change all these. She still held his sleeve. Can you? Is this how you beg people? Li Nanheng glanced at the way she was holding his sleeve. If he didn't let go, she wouldn't let him go. Feng Ling paused. Feng Ling paused. She wanted to say that he was the one who refused to let her go, but it wasn't good to argue with him about this matter. She only said, I think that although they are in the wrong, at least each of them has great potential. If I recruit a new batch of newcomers, they will also be young and energetic. They will also have to start over. It's better to gradually get used to the people I'm already familiar with. Since you've given the position of the drill master for the newcomers to me, you have to give me this opportunity. Also, believe me, I will definitely keep these 20 people. Li Nanheng curved his lips. Kiss me first? Feng Ling. Why are you still kissing me at this time? Mr. Mo is still lying in the hospital, and the newcomers have just finished their assessment. The fate of the two teams is in your hands. Why are you still kissing me? Li Nanheng coldly sneered. As long as Mo Jingshan doesn't wake up, you will accompany Jin Wan in melancholy? What? Don't you want to live your own life? Feng Ling, there's one more thing you said wrong. The fate of the newcomers is in their own hands. I can't stand in front of them again and again when they go out on missions. They don't have 9 lives. Whether they can stand firm in the base depends on their own ability. You can protect them for a while, but you can't protect them for a lifetime. Even if you can't protect them for a lifetime, you have to give them a chance. All right, I'll give them a chance. Li Nanheng leaned his face closer. I'll give it to them after a kiss. You, Li Nanheng raised his brows in this posture, and his expression clearly hid a hint of success, as though saying that he was so shameless. It was not the first day she had met him. In fact, since Mr. Mo's accident, Feng Ling had not seen him for many days. For the person she liked, Feng Ling would also break many rules. For example, she would never show affection in front of others, but just now, Li Nanheng directly held her waist and left in public. Even if she didn't show off, she was still showing off. For example, although there were no newcomers around, some of the seniors in the base would occasionally pass by. It was true that he missed her, but now he insisted on kissing her at this time. This man was really shameless. Feng Ling clenched her right hand into a fist. After struggling for a few seconds, she quickly turned her head and kissed him on the cheek. It was less than a second. It couldn't be called a kiss at all. In fact, it was just a kiss on his face. Then she quickly took a step back, raised the hand that the man had just let go of, and put it on her mouth. Her neck was red. Because a few familiar brothers from the base hall passed by just now. Although they stiffened their heads and did not turn their heads, the more they did not dare to turn their heads, the more it meant that they had seen it just now. Li Nanheng thought about it. You're the only one who begs so insincerely. If it were anyone else, I wouldn't agree. From his words, Feng Ling heard a glimmer of hope for those newcomers and quickly nodded. Thank you, boss. Li Nanheng was extremely evil and said, can't you change big to big? Chapter 12:24. Feng Ling didn't understand what he meant at first, but after a few seconds she understood what he meant. She said in a muffled voice, I'm not married to you. It's not appropriate to call you that. Li Nanheng sneered. You really refuse to give up until all hope is gone. But even if Li Nanheng wanted to tell her the fact that Feng Ling had married him 3 years ago, the untimely cry in her stomach interrupted his plan to immediately acknowledge her as his wife. After all, she had to eat. How long has it been since you last ate? Not long. Maybe it's noon? Or maybe I was so busy in the morning that I forgot. In fact, Feng Ling only ate once yesterday morning and hadn't eaten much since then. She didn't have much appetite, and because of her menstrual period she was not feeling well. She was too busy with the assessment today, so she didn't want to eat anything at all. However, she didn't expect such an embarrassing thing to happen to her. She was talking to Li Nanheng, but her stomach actually made a sound. At this moment the newcomers had come out one by one, especially the people of Team 2. When they came out and saw that Boss Li and Drill Master Feng Ling were still outside, they all looked embarrassed and scared. They couldn't wait to take a detour, fearing that Boss Li, who had been secretly scolded by them many times a few days ago, would be unhappy and punish them. Although Li Nanheng wanted to single out a few boys to teach them a lesson, he was worried that Feng Ling was not in a good state during her menstrual period and that she hadn't eaten, so he greeted the drill master of Team 2 and asked the newcomers of the 2 teams to go out for a meal. The newcomers of the 2 teams were worried that they wouldn't even be qualified to mingle in front of Boss in the future. When they came out they were all dejected. When they suddenly heard that Boss Li was treating them to a meal, they didn't know whether it was to drive them away or the base planned to give them another chance. They were all extremely nervous, but they didn't want to miss the opportunity to eat with their idol, so they all agreed. What was even more unexpected was that Boss Lee, who had just told them to scram expressionlessly on the training ground today, would actually treat them to hot pot. The weather was so cold, but the legendary iron-faced Yama Boss Lee was so warm. Li Nanhing sent someone out of the base to book a place. The sky had just turned dark, and the base sent more than a dozen cars to send the newcomers to the place for dinner. Of course, although Boss Lee was treating, he definitely wouldn't sit at the same table as them. However, this was the United States after all. It wasn't easy to find such a large, luxurious, and delicious hot pot restaurant. Furthermore, it was Boss's invitation. Even if they couldn't sit at Boss's table, everyone felt honored. Li Nanhing's table included Feng Ling, Ah Feng, and the others, as well as several old people in the base hall, including the sniper team Han Jin, Xiao Su, and the others. They were all acquaintances. Because they were too familiar with each other, Feng Ling was much more at ease. She didn't want to be poked by the curious gazes of the newcomers again and again. Not long after, the waiter of the Hot Pot City brought in all the ingredients needed for these large tables. Tam shouted excitedly and pushed K at the same time. "Brother, I never thought that one day Boss Lee would treat me to a meal, and it's even hot pot. Oh my god. Boss, how did you know that we've been craving hot pot recently? It's really hard to find something that tastes good in Los Angeles." "I don't know." Li Nanhing brought over 2 plates of Feng Ling's favorite food and placed them in front of her. "I only know that Feng Ling likes to eat it." Tam laughed shamelessly. "Whatever, as long as I have something to eat. The weather is so cold now. Eating hot pot is a perfect match. Feng Ling, in the future you have to order more delicious food in front of Boss. This way we might have a chance to have a few meals with him. Have you ordered beef? Come, bring me 2 more plates of beef. There's one next to it." Han Jin glanced at him. Tam turned to see 2 plates on the table and immediately put the meat into the hot pot with a smile. Li Nanhing took the fruit that Feng Ling usually liked to eat and placed it in front of her. "The low-ingredient hot pot I brought you last time is from this chain store near the hotel over there. I've asked around. The taste of several chain stores is the same. There's no difference. It's also very close to the base. If you still want to eat in the future, I can bring you here often." Feng Ling picked up a red cherry tomato from the plate next to her and put it in her mouth. The sour and sweet taste made her feel comfortable. She then took the initiative to put the vegetables in front of her into the hot pot, picked up an orange, peeled it, and very naturally brought the orange to the man's mouth. Li Nanhing, who had always hated eating oranges. He looked at the woman's white fingers and the orange piece that was brought to his mouth. Under the gaze of everyone at the table, he opened his mouth and ate it. Xiao Su, Han Jin, and Ah Feng, who knew Li Nanhing's habits very well. F***ck, did they see wrongly? Boss Lee actually ate an orange? He didn't vomit? He actually swallowed it. Eat it yourself. Li Nanhing, who had been fed 3 mouthfuls in a row, could not hold on any longer. Although he would most likely be able to drink poison even if Feng Ling fed him poison, the power of this orange was too strong. He really could not take it anymore. He pressed down her hand. "Eat what you like first." Then, the man fed another cherry tomato into her mouth, successfully stopping her from raising her hand to feed him. In fact, Feng Ling was actually because the fate of so many newcomers was still in his hands. If Boss Lee was unhappy and kicked them all out of the base, what could she do? Therefore, even though she was embarrassed, she still subconsciously wanted to do something. However, she was not good at pleasing others, so she did not even care what fruit she picked up. She only felt that orange pieces were easier to feed. When she realized what she had fed him, she turned her eyes abruptly and met the man's smiling gaze. "I say, the 2 of you." The 2 of them were feeding each other. The entire table was stuffed with dog food. Ah Feng said, "Restrain yourself, can't you restrain yourself a little? There are so many people here. They are all waiting to eat hot pot, but in the end they were fed by your dog food first. Are you going to let them eat? This is not the base. I'm dating my own woman. It's not like we're at the entrance of the base hall. Are you going to interfere?" Li Nanheng glanced at him. "You've been in the Li family for so long. Have you really not learned the slightest ability to read people's expressions?" Ah Feng. He knew that he would bear a grudge against him for affecting Boss Li's love life. Ah Feng's twitching expression and the expressions of the others at the table who pretended not to see or hear clearly did not affect Li Nanheng's desire to fall in love with his little wife. Because of Ah Feng's words, Feng Ling felt that she should restrain herself. She was about to stand up and change seats when the man stretched out his long arm and placed it on the back of her chair. His voice was light but had an irresistible deterrent force. "Sit down. Begging for monthly votes." Chapter 1225. Feng Ling sat down directly. Seeing that Feng Ling was so obedient to Boss Li, everyone at the table couldn't help sighing. Little Feng Ling, you are no longer the Feng Ling who appears to be obedient but doesn't take boss seriously in your heart, Han Jin said and shook his head. No, I used to be obedient, Feng Ling said. Yes, I can prove it. Our Feng Ling has always been absolutely obedient in the base. She has never been disloyal. She is very obedient. Kay shouted with the smell of alcohol in his mouth. Tisk everywhere. Han Jin squinted at him and then looked at Feng Ling saying, the past is the past and now is the present. Don't you know who the man beside you was before and who the man beside you is now? Feng Ling said, he used to be boss. What about now? Xiao Su answered with a smirk. Now he is also old. Feng Ling didn't finish her sentence and Li Nanheng next to her said lightly, now he is my husband. Puff. Kay almost spat out the mouthful of wine he had just drunk. He quickly turned his head and coughed several times in a row. His face turned red and when he saw Feng Ling's face was also red, he immediately grinned. Yes. Ignoring the gazes of the others, Li Nanheng knew that Feng Ling was thin-skinned when it came to this kind of thing. She couldn't express what she thought or said so he didn't say more. After teasing her, he stopped talking about this and began to talk about other things. Then Li Nanheng took Feng Ling, avoided the others, and took her to a relatively secluded corridor behind the hot pot restaurant. The two of them didn't spend much time together in the base. She finally returned to the base after so many years, but in the past month or so since she came back, she spent most of her time with the newcomers. Besides, she had been accompanying Jin Wan in the hospital for the past few days, and the two of them only really got along with each other for 2 short days last weekend. After that, there were so many big and small things to deal with so they didn't have time to spend together. There wasn't much time left for each other. Even if they were in the same place, the time where they could only occasionally pass each other or exchange a few words was far from enough for people who had finally gotten to know each other. Li Nanheng wanted to have some quiet space with Feng Ling to talk to her, to make her happy, to make her feel more relaxed and happy, to temporarily forget the burden of the youth training team, and to temporarily forget about Jin Wan. Apart from the people in the base, she rarely interacted with anyone else. She had very few friends but Jin Wan was one of them. He could understand her concern, but seeing that she didn't smile for the past few days, although he could understand, he still hoped that she could relax. Ms. Wanzhou took Jin Wan back to the Xiao family in Los Angeles. They will take good care of her. Don't worry about the hospital anymore. They will inform us if anything happens. If you miss Jin Wan, you can go see her when it's convenient. Li Nanheng said as he brought her to the window at the end of the corridor. The temperature in this hot pot city was a little hot, but there was a little cool wind by the window, making people feel that the air temperature was moderate and very comfortable. Feng Ling nodded. Seeing that she was so obedient, Li Nanheng vaguely heard what she said to the newcomer outside the door today. Although she was just a woman, her voice was clear and clean, but each word was sonorous and powerful. No matter how cold and distant she was in front of others, no matter how serious she was in front of the newcomers, in front of him, she had already broken through her previous caution and restraint. She was more and more used to softening her temper in front of him. She was so warm and gentle that it made him want to hold her in his arms and rub her hard into his body. Li Nanheng raised his hand and gently rubbed her head. I know that after returning to the base from the hospital, you've been under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, your ability to adjust yourself has never disappointed me. Those newcomers have been temporarily rejected by me, but I believe that one day, they will gradually grow in my hands and become a batch of members that I recognize. Be patient. I'll be patient too. Feng Ling knew that Li Nanheng didn't completely fall out with her at the assessment site today because he had given her an Feng enough face, but what he said later showed that he was really dissatisfied. But she never expected that Li Nanheng would compromise to this extent because of her. Boss Li, who had always been in the base and would never spoil anyone, actually patiently waited for her to grow up with the newcomers. It would be a lie to say that she was not touched. Feng Ling didn't know what to say, but instinctively reached out to hold his waist, leaned into his arms and gave him a real hug. This was the first time that the little woman had taken the initiative to throw herself into his arms with such a soft expression. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction, hugged her firmly, lowered his head and kissed her on the face. As if kissing was not enough, he lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. Feng Ling was afraid that any passing waiter or people from the base would see it, so she subconsciously dodged. Before she could dodge, her chin was pinched by the man and kissed her. Liu. Feng Ling's voice paused because of his kiss and she looked at him. Li Nanheng originally only wanted to kiss her, but because she was staring at him at such a close distance, he took a deep breath and pinched her chin. At the same time, when he thought of the thing she was holding in the bathroom today, the veins on his forehead throbbed. The heavens seemed to be purposely going against him. It wasn't easy for him to return to the base. It wasn't easy for him to find time to be affectionate with his little wife, but her period came at the right time. Feng Ling didn't know what the man was thinking. She just couldn't imagine that as a drill master of the newcomers, she had to establish her prestige in front of the newcomers again. She had to recover from her bad state and be a good figure in front of the newcomers, but now she was kissing here. If a few newcomers passed by her face, would she still want it? Feeling Feng Ling's grip on his waist tightened, she was obviously nervous. Li Nanheng kissed and carried her to a corner. He was about to continue kissing her hard when his phone suddenly rang. He impatiently took out his phone and glanced at it, then strangely glanced at the many tables over there and picked up the phone. Speak. Xiao Su chuckled on the phone. Boss, Ah Feng said that it's rare for us to come out today, so we should have a good night. He plans to treat everyone to a hot spring in the nearby hot spring hotel before going back. Let's relax together. Chapter 12:26. Ah Feng realized that he had offended Boss Li too much recently and had a rare desire to live. He wanted to take this opportunity to create some ambiguous space for Boss and Feng Ling. Perhaps this way Boss's anger would dissipate. Li Nanheng, who instantly understood his meaning, snorted coldly. He's considerate. Unfortunately, not to mention soaking in the hot spring, even if he stripped Feng Ling clean and stuffed her into his arms, he still couldn't sleep with her. The most hateful thing in the world was a woman's menstruation. It was neither too early nor too late. It always came at the right time. After hanging up the phone, Li Nanheng grabbed Feng Ling with one hand, continued to hold her by his side and walked out. Where are we going? Feng Ling asked. Someone specially invited us to soak in the hot spring in order to atone for his sins. Hot spring? I've never soaked in it. Li Nanheng turned to see the ignorant curiosity in Feng Ling's eyes, gritted his teeth, and hated her menstruation again. After eating hot pot, they went to soak in the hot spring. This kind of treatment could be said to be rare in the base. This group of newcomers who came out to eat were really lucky. The point was that although these newcomers had been in the base for a month, they still didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Apart from knowing that the deputy drill master, oh no, Boss Li was not easy to provoke and they shouldn't easily approach and offend him, this group of newcomers would still gather together from time to quietly discuss various new things. When they first entered the hot spring hotel, a group of people still bowed in front of Li Nanheng and said that boss was good. In the past, they didn't recognize Mao Tai as they had eyes but were all ignored by Li Nanheng, so they could only gather aside and didn't dare to say anything. But when they changed into their swimming trunks and went to the hot spring pool on the first floor of the hotel that was built like a mountain rock wall, they formed groups of 3 to 5 and went into the small pools to whisper to each other. When Han Jin and the others passed by the entrance of some small pools, they could still hear those people talking about the fact that Boss Li was actually the deputy drill master, and the deputy drill master was actually Boss Li. They still hadn't figured it out yet. They all said that it was fortunate that they didn't directly confront the deputy drill master, otherwise they would really die today. Feng Ling was the last to enter. As she was a woman, she went to the women's changing room by herself. Then, because of her period, she specially bought a pair of waterproof shorts from the staff of the hot spring hotel. Then she put on the swimsuit she bought with the shorts she had just bought. The swimsuit she bought was a slightly more conservative style. After all, there were so many men in the base. If she went into the hot spring wearing all kinds of bikinis like the others in this locker room, Li Nanheng would probably be the first to pull her out with a green face. After changing, Feng Ling entered the hot spring. However, this place was really built like a cave. There were all kinds of small ponds everywhere. There were all kinds of medicinal ponds, rose ponds, and everything. Furthermore, there were small signs engraved on the stone walls outside each small pond, stating the temperature and effect of the water in each small pond. She walked all the way in, listening to the laughter and noise in each small pool. When she walked near a medicinal bath, she suddenly heard someone talking. Hey, did you see Boss Li when he was changing in the men's locker room just now? No, Boss Li's locker room shouldn't be with us. The men's locker rooms are all connected. Even the richest man in the world has to walk in from there. Ah Feng and the others were all there just now. Boss Li must be there too, but we just didn't meet him. So what if we meet him? Can we go up and suck up to him? I don't fucking dare. A few days ago, weren't those people in our team always talking about the deputy drill master in private? Damn it, I'm scared when I think about it. I knew this deputy drill master's aura was different. Not to mention the main drill master, even the second in command of the base like Ah Feng was respectful to him. At that time we just didn't dare to think about it. Otherwise, if the second in command of the base treated him so carefully, who else could it be? We should have known it was Boss Li TSK. Hey, by the way, Drill Master Feng Ling and Boss Li, is there a need to say it? Anyone who is not blind can see that they are obviously a couple. I really didn't expect that although Drill Master Feng Ling is indeed quite beautiful, she is usually so serious and doesn't have any femininity. I thought a woman like her would be more attractive to those little fangirls. Boss Li is tall and masculine. Don't you usually like long-haired Lolitas? Lolita my foot. I think Drill Master Feng is more interesting. At least she's not pretentious. She's much more charming than those little girls who speak with their throats pinched all day and scream when their hands are scratched. She heard so many words just by passing by. Feng Ling thought that the existence of Li Nanheng really destroyed her cold image. If she wanted to be more dignified in the future, she would have to think of other ways. She was about to continue walking forward when she suddenly heard another sentence. Boss Li's nose is so straight and his figure is so strong. I guess the size of his lower body is not small, ha. It's a pity that I didn't see it in the locker room just now. Otherwise, I can really go and secretly watch it. Hearing this, Feng Ling, who was already prepared to leave, decisively and quickly left, trying to walk as far away as possible. The area of this hot spring room was very large and it was rugged. She had to walk around so she couldn't see which pools were in front of her. After walking for a while, Feng Ling seemed to be lost. She looked around and could only find a place where she couldn't hear them. Anyway, it was not convenient for a woman to soak in the same pool as others, so she might as well find an empty pool and soak in it by herself. She had just walked to a quiet place on the other side and looked inside. Seeing that there was no one in the pool, she was about to walk in when suddenly a figure jumped up behind her. She turned her eyes vigilantly, but before she could see who it was, she was suddenly pushed against the smooth stone wall. The man lowered his head and was about to kiss her, but she looked at the face in front of her with a shocked expression. After confirming that the person in front of her was Li Nanheng, her tense body slowly relaxed. Feeling her tension, Li Nanheng didn't kiss her. Looking at her wide-eyed expression, he smiled and pinched her cheek. Are you scared? Who do you think it is? Who dares to touch me like this? It was because she knew that others didn't have the guts, so even though she subconsciously wanted to kick his family jewels, she still held back. Chapter 12:27. Even though she did not soak in the hot spring, the temperature of this place was still hot. The surroundings were surrounded by white mist, which made the man's action of pressing her against the stone wall appear much more intimate. Feng Ling shifted her eyes to look at the empty pool inside. What pool is this? Li Nanheng glanced at the stone carvings outside and said, It's an ordinary spring pool. In fact, most of these so-called hot springs are the same. Unless it's a hotel opened at the location of the spring, it's basically just a gimmick. They put all kinds of things in the water and put all kinds of colors and smells in it. It's not as clean as this ordinary spring pool. Feng Ling didn't quite understand, but when she heard that this pool was clean and saw that there was indeed a location connected to the spring, she guessed that it was because this place was closest to the mountain range and was too close to it. Furthermore, no one would specially come to soak in an ordinary hot spring pool. No wonder there was no one here. She nodded, gently pushed him away and turned to walk in. She stood by the pool and looked down. Then she stretched out her feet and gently touched the water. The temperature was a little hot, but it was not hot. The water here was about 42 degrees. Li Nanheng saw the temperature outside and walked over. Seeing that she was standing by the side to test the water, he did not say anything. He untied the bath towel on his body and entered the water. The moment the man undid his towel and entered the water wearing only his black swimming trunks, Feng Ling's gaze faltered on his body. Nanheng did not show the slightest bit of fear. It was clear that it was rare for her to have a chance to admire his perfect figure. He even gave her a devilish smile. Feng Ling, what was he smiling at? Crazy. Earlier she wanted to ask if the water was so hot. Didn't he feel hot just sitting in it? She also turned back to look at the temperature. After confirming that it was 42 degrees, she leaned over to Li Nanheng and touched the temperature of the water beside him. She then looked at him and asked, Is it hot? It's not hot. Li Nanheng gave her an affirmative answer. She looked at his body in the water and felt that it was really comfortable to soak in. Just as she was hesitating about which direction to enter the water, the man's arm suddenly reached out in her direction and grabbed her waist. He pulled her down along with the bath towel on her. With a plop, Feng Ling fell into the water. She hurriedly jumped out of the water, raised her hand to wipe the water, and said angrily in the white mist, "Li Nanheng, what are you doing?" Cough. The man saw her struggling in the water with a flushed face. He just wanted to tease her, but in the end he couldn't help but grab her. He stepped forward and hugged the woman who was still struggling in the water. He bent down and kissed her hard on the lips. Feng Ling looked at his face and eyes and felt as though she was about to be sucked in by his eyes. She was so angry that she wanted to kick him, but in the end she softened in the hot water. His feelings were like a raging flame that had been doused with boiling oil. Even water couldn't extinguish it. The heat waves surged and turned everything into ashes. Under the kiss, their lips and tongues intertwined. The two of them were trying their best to absorb each other's breath, but it was as though there was a curtain separating them. They only felt that it was not enough, not enough. Li Nanheng helped Feng Ling up from the spring. Only then did she notice that when she stood up, the spring water did not pass her ribs. He pushed her against the side of the wet and hard spring. As he kissed her passionately, he tore the bath towel on her body. Earlier she was also wrapped in a bath towel outside her swimsuit. Before she was ready to enter the water, she was suddenly pulled down by him. The bath towel on her body was wet and wrapped around her body. This was indeed the place connected to the largest spring in the hotel. Unlike the other hot pools with all kinds of aromatherapy items, the water in the spring was clean and hot. The temperature was slightly hot, but it was the healthiest and most comfortable temperature. Occasionally the water that came out of the spring was slightly turbulent, splashing on the stone wall next to it, stirring up little splashes. The only sound that could be heard was the gurgling of the spring, and nothing else could be heard. Feng Ling was pressed against the stone wall by the spring and kissed. Her bathrobe had long been thrown away. Although the newly bought swimsuit was very conservative, it still revealed a large portion of her back. The man saw that the material of her chest was connected and directly rubbed her smooth and tender snow-white back. Don't. To be kissed to such an extent in this hot spring hotel where other people might pass by at any time, a certain sense of shame made Feng Ling even more sensitive. She panted under Li Nanheng's comfort. Suddenly, she felt the man lower his head and bite the strap of her swimsuit on her shoulder. She immediately called out softly to stop him, but before she could do so, the man had already lowered his head even more, and kissed. Her entire body instantly tensed up, and even her toes that were submerged under the water curled up. Her face, which she usually pretended to be dignified in front of the newcomers, gradually became confused because of this tide of passion. Her expression of struggling between indulgence and rationality was sexy enough to drive people crazy. Li Nanheng. Her voice was hoarse. Because of the man's kiss, her eyes were half open and she could not help but gasp. "What do you call me?" The man took the time to raise his head and kiss her lips comfortingly. He asked in a low, threatening voice. "Feng Ling, call me hubby." The water mist filled the air, covering everything. Seeing that she had been maintaining her rationality and refusing to call him, Li Nanheng turned her back. She could instantly feel Li Nanheng pressing against her underwater. Her face was pressed against the stone wall. It was a little cold, but her body was too hot in the hot spring. This made the man's body even more hot. She trembled because of this overflowing tide of passion, and her eyes were a little unfocused. All of a sudden, the man pushed against her from behind. Even though there was a layer of her swimsuit and waterproof shorts inside, she was caught off guard. She could not help but gasp. "Don't." The man behind her paused. He seemed to be stimulated by her suddenly low, hoarse, and somewhat soft voice. He held her waist tightly and moved hard under the water. It was through the clothes. It was through the clothes. Even so, Feng Ling was so stimulated that she was about to burst into tears. The person who was in the water with him was Feng Ling. This matter had always been difficult for Li Nanheng to endure. He leaned over her. From the surface of the water, he only caused a splash, but under the hot spring, his movements were threatening. Feng Ling was in a daze when she heard the man ask, "What did you call me?" "Bo boss." "En? Bo, you?" The woman pressed against the stone wall's voice was moist and hoarse. Her eyes were filled with sparks and her eyes were red. Chapter 12:28. "Hubby?" Her voice was so hoarse that it was almost inaudible, but it caused Li Nanheng's eyes to darken. The man's movements caused the water to splash. The warmth of the hot spring combined with the touch of Feng Ling's swimsuit made the man understand that he was about to lose his mind. He took a deep breath. Before he could do anything crazy, he abruptly turned Feng Ling over and pressed his chest against hers. The hardness and softness collided. The water vapor rising from the direction of the spring blurred their eyes, and the constant temperature was still very hot. Water splashed on their faces. Feng Ling was brought away by the true emotions and feelings in her heart. Looking at her, Li Nanheng bent down and kissed her fiercely. He kissed her urgently and kissed her lips hungrily. He kissed her with almost violent strength. His other hand gradually moved down, stroked her waist and held it. Feng Ling had been in the base for a long time, and no one had really come into close contact with her. He didn't know that under her tough appearance her entire body was actually soft, and her waist was also slender. He pressed her harder into his arms. Feng Ling inexplicably felt that the man's hand on her waist was so ambiguous that it was stimulating. She was also stimulated to the point that she half closed her eyes and raised her neck to moan softly, "I am now." She wanted to say that she was on her period and it was inconvenient. However, she only had time to say 3 words before her voice was sealed between Li Nanheng's lips and teeth. Li Nanheng hurriedly hugged her even tighter, rubbing against her clothes and rubbing his hands against her body, stimulating her. He tightly hugged the little woman he had loved for many years and felt Feng Ling trembling slightly in his arms. Her trembling made him feel satisfied, and it made him crazy and infatuated. After the kiss, their lips and teeth were still pressed against each other. In this hot spring, Feng Ling almost lost herself in such an uncontrollable kiss. She subconsciously opened her eyes and looked down at the man's naked chest. She didn't know when her hand had started to caress his chest. With just a glance, her scalp went numb, and she quickly moved her hand away. However, just as her hand was about to leave his body, Li Nanheng suddenly grabbed her wrist and pressed her hand down into the water. Feng Ling's eyes, which had turned slightly red from the kiss, were now moistened by the surrounding mist. She struggled gently but did not struggle too hard. The man pressed her hand down and bent down to kiss her ear. His breathing had yet to calm down. He said seductively and huskily, "I know it's not convenient for you right now, but I can't get out of the water like this. Help me." Feng Ling's hand was held so tightly by him. In the warm fog, Feng Ling's heart trembled because of the man's low and hoarse voice. She obediently pressed her hand against his. Just as they were about to explode, Li Nanheng suddenly carried Feng Ling out of the water to prevent her from dirtying the water in the spring. At the same time, he pressed her heavily into a hidden crack in the stone wall. He murmured, "If we don't quickly become husband and wife, I'm afraid I won't be able to take it." Then he couldn't help but hold her cheeks, which were burning red from his continuous movements, and kiss her hard. By the side, the water in the spring was gurgling, and the water in the spring gradually flowed faster. The white steam and the sound of the water covered this small space very well. Even if they were not in the water, they were not worried that someone would see anything when passing by because the fog was really too thick. Feng Ling couldn't breathe from Li Nanheng's kiss. Her lips were slightly swollen. She took a chance to catch her breath and then was kissed hard again. She was a little distracted and her eyes were unfocused. For a moment she didn't understand what he meant by the name of husband and wife. In the end, Li Nanheng abruptly bit the tender skin between her neck and shoulder. At the same time he let out a long muffled groan. A moment later he hugged her, buried his face in her neck, and pressed against her neck, panting for a long time. In the end he gently and lovingly kissed her neck, shoulder, chin, mouth, nose and finally back to her lips. He kissed her again and again as though he was full of love. "Stop kissing me." Feng Ling's face was flushed and her hands were trembling. "If this goes on, how am I going to accompany them for shooting practice tomorrow? I can't even pick up the gun." Hearing Feng Ling's low protest, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. It was obviously not enough to relieve the gap that they couldn't be together these days. He kissed her cheek and panted lowly, "Baby, I love you." She knew that he really loved her, but when he said the word love so straightforwardly, Feng Ling subconsciously pressed her head against the man's shoulder and was too embarrassed to look at him. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction and hugged her tightly. Then he lowered his head to look at the mess he had made on her swimsuit. His eyes darkened and his voice was muffled. "There's a single bathroom at the back. Let's go take a shower together?" Although this man tried his best to restrain himself and did not do anything else, Feng Ling was inevitably bullied for a while. He hugged and kissed her. Under the shower full of hot water, she couldn't even take a proper shower. In the end, she was kissed until she leaned against the wall. Li Nanheng took the shower down and washed her from head to toe. After washing, he hugged and continued to kiss, as though even if he couldn't do anything else, he wanted to kiss back all the emptiness he had felt these days. The other people in the hot spring room had long discovered that Boss Li and Feng Ling had disappeared, but they tacitly didn't ask a single word. Even the newcomers who were not very sensible could roughly guess what was going on. They could joke about anything, but they didn't dare to joke around this time. After all, if they really said anything wrong, their lives would be over. She tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb from his kisses. She was so embarrassed by his torture that she tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb. Don't kiss me." Feng Ling seemed to hear someone walking past the bathroom and quickly whispered. Li Nanheng kissed her on the lips again. He had seen her being tormented under him until she lost her soul. He had seen her cry until she couldn't control her body and her eyes were dazed. Thus, looking at her who was still somewhat sober, he couldn't restrain himself. He just wanted to hold her and become one with her soul and body. He wanted her to like everything about him. He wanted her to be comfortable. He wanted her to lose her soul only for him. Chapter 12:29. After Feng Ling returned to the base, she almost couldn't get up on time the next morning. She didn't fall asleep until midnight. Fortunately, she had set an alarm clock on her cell phone. Usually, she didn't need an alarm clock and could wake up on time according to her biological clock habits. But today she still waited until the alarm clock rang before opening her eyes. The morning training passed peacefully. After lunch, she took the time to gather the people who had problems in the assessment field and talk to them for a while. From their performance and words, she roughly understood their feelings and thoughts. Of course, although the words Li Nanheng said in public sounded like he was belittling them, for these young and energetic children, this was the way to really arouse their fighting spirit. Today, none of these people admitted defeat, didn't want to be looked down upon, and didn't want to leave the base because of Boss Li's disapproval, so they were particularly energetic during the morning training. In the afternoon, a few uninvited guests suddenly came to the base. They were not uninvited guests, but not only Feng Ling, but also most of the members of the base were slightly flustered by their arrival. After all, the four elders of the Li family were never easy to deal with. Every time the four of them appeared in the base, everyone basically didn't have a good day. If it wasn't for this rule being rectified, they would have to scold them for something they didn't like, causing the entire base to panic. The key was that the person in charge of the base hall, Feng, happened to be one of these elders' men. Especially Feng Ling, who had been driven out of the base by them, was back. Hearing that the four elders of the Li family had come, Feng sat in the base hall in a daze. Obviously, even Feng hadn't received any notice this time. Han Jin and Xiao Su frowned in an instant. Xiao Su, why is Elder Li here? Han Jin thought of the scene before Feng Ling was driven out of the base by Elder Li and also frowned. Should we let Feng Ling hide for a while? Feng didn't say anything but turned to look at Boss Li, who was sitting at the conference table in the base hall with a calm expression. Logically speaking, the appearance of the Li elders would definitely target Feng Ling, and Boss Li would definitely be the first to be unhappy, but now looking at Boss Li's calm expression, Feng felt that there might be a turn for the better. Xiao Su and Han Jin were still discussing worriedly, wondering if the four elders had heard the news that Feng Ling had returned, but they didn't think it was possible. Feng Ling had been back for more than a month. When the base made the decision to recall Feng Ling, they didn't intervene, and now they didn't say anything about this matter. Why did they suddenly come again as soon as the newcomer assessment was over? Boss, what do you think? Feng asked. The silver lighter in Li Nanheng's hand was casually flipped twice in his palm. He did not answer. After hearing the news that Elder Li had come, Feng Ling didn't seem to be affected, but her mood was somewhat depressed, especially when she thought of what had happened when she left. She thought of what the four elders had said and the so-called rules in the base. She instinctively felt that there should be a hard battle to fight, but this time the situation was at least much better than last time. This time, everyone knew the ins and outs of the matter, including how she returned to the base, and Li Nanheng was also in the base now. If there was anything, they could talk to each other face to face. They wouldn't miss each other like in the past. Drill Master Feng Ling, Elder Li wants to see you. Feng Ling was still instructing the rookies on the training ground when someone suddenly called her from outside. She stood in place for a few seconds and looked back. Got it? What was going to come would come. Then let's face them one by one and solve them one by one. She raised her hand and tidied up the collar of her black uniform. She said a few words to the newcomers in the team and told them to practice by themselves. Then she turned and walked out without hesitation. When she walked in the direction of the base hall, as she expected, the people in Team 3 who didn't get along with her were already waiting on the way. Seeing her walking over, they stood by the side and pretended to be talking about something, but when she passed by them, she heard their conversation. I knew she wouldn't stay in the base for long. Sooner or later she would be kicked out. The elders definitely won't let her stay. They were the ones who drove her away. Now Boss Lee brought her back. Isn't this a slap in the face to the elders? Boss Lee is their only grandson. They won't say anything, but Feng Ling has nothing to do with the Lee family. They definitely want to get rid of her so as not to ruin the atmosphere and reputation of the base. Feng Ling heard these words when she passed by them. If it were a few years ago, she would have walked by silently and expressionlessly as if nothing had happened. At this moment, she stopped in her tracks and slowly turned her head around. She looked at them with a cold and indifferent gaze. Feeling her sharp gaze, the members of Team 3 abruptly turned to look at her. They were slightly stunned. They didn't expect that Feng Ling, who was used to being calm and silent, would look at them like this after hearing their deliberately mocking words. Obviously, she didn't intend to let it go so easily. One of the members of Team 3 who was particularly sturdy was not afraid of her. After all, they were all veterans in the base. Who didn't know what was going on? What are you looking at? You're just a little girl. Don't listen to the men's conversation. Otherwise, you'll cover your face and run away when we talk about something that will make you feel ashamed. How embarrassing that would be. After saying that, the few of them stood there and laughed out loud. I've been in the base for so many years and I have many brothers by my side. Why don't you know what will make me feel embarrassed? What are you talking about that can make me feel ashamed? Tell me. Feng Ling smiled lightly and walked toward them. Then she stood in front of them, took out her cell phone from her pocket, and clicked on the screen casually. Although they didn't see the screen, they heard the soft beep on her cell phone and knew that she was recording. Originally, they really wanted to say some dirty jokes or something strange to humiliate her, but they also knew that she was going to see old Master Lee soon. Even if the 4 elders of the Lee family didn't like her, if she dragged them into the water with the recording before she was kicked out, then it wouldn't be worth it. The people of Team 3 hesitated for a moment, but in the end they didn't dare to speak. They just looked at her mockingly and scolded with a smile. There's nothing to say to a woman like you. It's a waste of time to talk too much. Elder Lee is already waiting for you. Hurry up and go. Chapter 12:30. If it weren't for the fact that Elder Lee was waiting for her, Feng Ling would probably have taught these people a lesson. Anyway, the worst result was that she would be driven out of the base again. If she really wanted to leave, she didn't mind taking revenge on them and taking these members of Team 3 with her. She looked indifferently at their expressions, which showed that they didn't dare to speak carelessly. She curled her lips indifferently and suddenly swept her feet forward. 2 of them staggered back a step and almost fell. Then they were astonished to see that she used the tip of her foot to easily pick up a balancing steel pole placed by their feet. With a light push of her leg, the long steel pole directly and steadily fell into her hand. Feng Ling simply turned her hand and swung the steel rod forward, almost hitting their heads. A gust of wind swept past their heads. Although it didn't touch them, it carried a hint of killing intent. This was Feng Ling's silent warning. The few of them didn't say anything, but their expressions were ugly as they looked at each other. If they really had to fight, they might not be able to defeat Feng Ling, who now had a weapon in her hand. There were many men in the base and it was not uncommon for them to fight in private. However, as long as they didn't use guns on their own people and the situation was not serious, the higher-ups would turn a blind eye to it. After all, fighting was also a man's habit, just like how women were naturally used to gossiping, so they couldn't be bothered to deal with it. Feng Ling clearly knew how to not violate the rules of the base. Just the steel rod in her hand was enough to beat all of them down. Those people were sensible. They had always been dissatisfied with her, so they didn't want to cause trouble, so they simply stepped back and then turned to leave. As they walked, they said, "There's no need to waste time with a person who is about to leave. Let's go to the base hall to watch the fun." Feng Ling threw the steel rod in her hand forward expressionlessly, and it instantly landed about half a meter in front of those people. The lower part of the rod was directly inserted into the solid and flat soil on the ground, and it was so stable that it didn't even tremble. When they came back to themselves and looked back, Feng Ling had already turned and left. When she arrived at the base hall, she found that many familiar old members and important leaders of the base were there. She didn't look around but saw Grandfather Li, Li Nanheng's grandfather, Li Junyan, sitting in the main seat in the middle of the base hall. He was the one who had personally driven her out of the base. Even though her relationship with Li Nanheng was stable, and even though he was Li Nanheng's grandfather, Feng Ling didn't look at him angrily, but when she walked in, she didn't show any expression. Li Junyan was still talking to Ah Feng. Ah Feng stood by the side and answered every question he asked. His attitude was quite respectful. When he saw Feng Ling, he stopped talking and turned to look at her. He looked at her up and down and said mildly, "You're here?" Although Li Nanheng was the boss of the base, Ah Feng was still Elder Li's man. Thus, Ah Feng treated Li Nanheng like a brother and a subordinate, but in front of Elder Li he was clearly a respectful junior. Seeing Grandfather Li's indifferent attitude toward Feng Ling, the people in the base who were waiting to see Feng Ling make a fool of herself had already foreseen Feng Ling's ending. They guessed that she would still be driven out and wouldn't be spared any face. They thought that Elder Li must have come with anger. After all, the person who was driven out by them dared to come back now. He didn't take them seriously at all. Feng Ling walked to about 7 or 8 meters in front of Li Junyan and stopped. She answered calmly, "Elder Li." The other 3 elders also sat by the side. They looked at her coldly and did not speak, but it was clear that they were not satisfied with her return. The people present couldn't tell what Li Junyan's attitude was, but looking at the expressions of the other 3 elders, they felt that this matter was almost certain. They wouldn't let Feng Ling stay. "And you've grown up. You're taller than 3 years ago, and you look much more mature than you did 3 years ago." Li Junyan looked at her. Although his expression did not change, he suddenly said this. "Everyone? That's not right." Shouldn't he angrily smash his walking stick and ask her how she had the nerve to come back? Feng Ling raised her eyes and scanned the 2 of them in the crowd. In the end, she found that Li Nanheng was not standing in the crowd. Instead, he was casually leaning against the railing at the corner of the stairs. He crossed his arms and looked in this direction. His eyes were calm. Seeing Li Nanheng's expression, Feng Ling retracted her gaze to look at Li Junyan. She saw that Grandfather Li had been staring at her, but this time, it was no longer filled with disgust, distance and rejection like when he had chased her away. Right now, in his eyes, he was sizing her up and carefully observing her. There was also an unknown emotion in his eyes. Feng Ling did not speak and Li Junyan did not ask her to speak. He just looked at her and said, "I already know that you're an instructor for the newcomers in the base. How is it? Is the performance of those newcomers acceptable? Is there anything you need to worry about? If there are any who are too disobedient, just look for Han Jin to help you. After all, he led the elite team in Team 1 back then. He has some experience." Although Han Jin, who was suddenly called out, was dumbfounded, he still quickly said, "Yes, if Drill Master Feng Ling needs anything, I will do my best to help." "Everyone, did old Master Li change his ways?" Even the other 3 elders looked confused. Didn't they accompany Big Brother here to get rid of this little girl? What was going on with Big Brother? The more he spoke, the more amiable he sounded. The more he spoke, the more it sounded like he was talking to his granddaughter-in-law. What was wrong with him? Feng Ling stood there for a long time before replying stiffly, "All right. This old man am probably getting old." Li Junyan ignored everyone's gazes and casually placed his hands on his walking stick. He said, "In the past I've always been very concerned about the difference between men and women, but after I checked some information about you when you were out on missions, I found that although you're young and a girl, your actions are not inferior to those men in the base at all. I'm old. Don't bother about what I did back then. Now that you're back, just live a good life." Just as Feng Ling was standing there in a daze and did not know what to say, Li Junyan suddenly said, "If you have time, come to the Li family for a meal." Everyone, *CK Did the sun rise from the west? Elder Li, cough cough. In order to have a great-grandson as soon as possible, I'll put aside my face for the time being, including the face of my 3 brainless brothers. Ahiyaha, please give me a monthly vote. Chapter 1231. She never expected that things would develop to the point where Grandfather Li invited Feng Ling to the Li family for a meal. Feng Ling didn't know how to react. She looked at the elders in front of her and didn't know how to answer. She felt that this matter had something to do with Li Nanheng, but she remembered that Grandfather Li was a very stubborn old man who wasn't easily shaken. However, his current attitude was clearly not only shaken, but he had already accepted her. She was very curious about how Li Nanheng did it. However, it was not appropriate for her to look in his direction. She only looked at Grandfather Li cautiously. She saw that Li Junyan and the other 3 elders' expressions didn't seem to be the same. At least, Li Junyan was calm. He clearly knew what he was saying and doing while the other 3 probably didn't know. Then this was even more awkward. She didn't speak, but Han Jin coughed by the side. Everyone present could tell that Grandfather Li had put down his 80-year-old face. Back then he had chased her away in public. Now he was apologizing to her in public. No matter what, she had to express her gratitude. Furthermore, the old man had already put down his attitude. If she kept remaining silent, it wouldn't be right. Feng Ling also knew that she shouldn't be silent. Feng Ling also knew that she shouldn't be silent. She deliberated for a few seconds before saying, "A few years ago I was still young and my way of doing things was too stiff and immature. When you rejected me, elderly, I didn't know how to prove myself in front of you. Now I came back so rashly, but elderly can forgive me. This is already a great forgiveness for me. It's really enough for me to stay in 11 base." As she spoke, she continued to look at Li Junyan. "Elderly, you're so magnanimous. You don't even care about your face in front of so many people. In your eyes, we're all children. The fact that you can apologize to a child is enough to show your magnanimity. I'm really satisfied now. Thank you, elderly, for accepting me." Feng Ling, who had never understood the ways of the world, had learned some tactful ways of speaking in the past 3 years. Her words were more or less in line with old Master Li's reputation. Although it was not particularly perfect, at least she had regained old Master Li's dignity. Neither of them had suffered any losses. Han Jin and the others were also very pleased to hear this and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then they looked at Xiao Su next to him and secretly conveyed satisfaction to each other. Not bad, Feng Ling has really grown up. Li Junyan only gave her a chance to stay on account of the Feng family and Li Nanheng. After all, he had seen this little girl's backbone. How old was she at that time? 17 years old? 18 years old? She was clearly lying on the ground in a sorry state, but when she raised her head, there was clearly alienation in her eyes. There was a faint indifference that kept people 1,000 miles away, and there was also a cold arrogance that was engraved in her bones. Even if she was being criticized by thousands of people, she just stood there without moving. She did not ask for a word, nor did she complain. If she could explain, she would explain. If she could not explain clearly, she would not waste her breath. He thought that someone with Feng Ling's personality would be in a good mood today because she had regained her face. However, he did not expect that after not seeing her for a few years, not only had she grown taller and matured, but her personality was also no longer so straightforward. At least, she knew how to say some polite words to help each other. This was in line with Grandfather Li's intentions. He looked at Feng Ling for a full half a minute, making Feng Ling wonder if there was something wrong with her. A moment later, Elder Li smiled faintly. "All right, let's not talk about the past. We're old and we can't make decisions in the base. You were raised by Nanheng. He poured all his blood and sweat into everything about you. I can't hurt his heart. Besides, you're indeed outstanding. It's undeniable that when the 4 of us were your age, apart from having some brute force, we might not be able to defeat you with our skills, so what else can we say? Of course, outstanding members have to stay. Besides." Li Junyan paused and suddenly said meaningfully, "Sooner or later you'll be a member of our Li family. We're family, so don't torture each other." Grandfather Li's surprising attitude was enough to shock everyone present, especially the members of Team 3 who had just ridiculed Feng Ling. They stood at the back of the crowd, their faces like frosted eggplants. One moment they were green, the next black. In the end, they did not dare to say a word. However, he suddenly said that she would be a member of the Li family sooner or later. Could it be that Grandfather Li knew about the ambiguous relationship between Li Nanheng and Feng Ling? 3 years ago, these 4 elders came to drive Feng Ling away. 3 years later they came again. Could it be that they came to see their granddaughter-in-law? Feng Ling looked at Li Junyan in shock. The other 3 elders were also confused. They looked at each other, then at their boss who was sitting in the main seat, and then at Li Nanheng who was standing at the staircase not far away with his arms crossed. Seeing that Li Nanheng seemed to be watching from afar, the 3 elders couldn't figure out what was going on today. Although they had their own tempers, since their big brother had already spoken, it was not appropriate for them to discuss among themselves in front of the base members. They simply kept quiet, but they still looked at Feng Ling in confusion. Such a tomboy. Although she was indeed fair, clean, and had delicate features, and she was indeed a woman, how could she have anything to do with the Li family? When he heard that Nanheng and this tomboy had some ambiguous feelings for each other, wasn't brother Li Junyan the first to throw his walking stick and curse on the spot? He even said that he would never agree to it. Wasn't this slap in the face a little too fast? Without waiting for her to answer, Grandfather Li continued to talk to her. "Speaking of which, you've been in the base for so many years and have known Nanheng for so many years. It's indeed time for you to go to the Li family for a meal. There are 2 chefs from China in the Li family. The Chinese food they make is very delicious. I think you'll like it. I do like Chinese food. Feng Ling paused. But wouldn't it be inconvenient to go to the Li family? Actually, it's already very much for me that you let me stay in the base. You'll be our Li family's daughter-in-law sooner or later. Right now you're going to the Li family as a guest. In the future, going to the Li family is equivalent to going home. What's inconvenient about it? Seeing her clueless expression, Grandfather Li instantly understood why his grandson had taken so many years to win her heart. He couldn't hold it in and decided to make it clear. Chapter 1232. Holius H*T. Grandfather Li recognized his granddaughter-in-law on the spot. What could be more exciting than this news in the 11 base over the years? If it were the Feng Ling from 3 years ago, she couldn't imagine that one day she would hear such a sentence in front of so many people in the base and in front of several elders of the Li family. Li Nanheng, who was still standing not far away, was helpless, but he also sighed and smiled because the old man was even more anxious than him. Feng Ling was still in a state of shock when suddenly the man's voice rang. Since you're invited to the Li family, you might as well agree. Anyway, you're busy taking care of the newcomers and can't find time to go to the Li family to eat with the elders for the time being. Agree first. Whether you go or not is up to you. Don't take it to heart. As soon as Li Nanheng finished speaking, Feng Ling abruptly glanced at him. Grandfather Li also turned his head and glared at him. He poked the ground hard with his walking stick. You bastard, in order to get your wife as soon as possible, this old man doesn't even care about my face. I'm helping you pave the way here, but you actually come to ruin my stage. I'm indeed a bastard. Who doesn't know that I, Li Nanheng, have been a bastard since I was a child? It's nothing new. Li Nanheng couldn't help laughing. Feng Ling is thin-skinned. If I had known that you were going to say these words when she was unprepared, I would have found a place with fewer people. Now in public, what do you want her to say? I didn't ask her to say anything. Grandfather Li glared at him again, warning him with his eyes that he was the one making the decision now and not to undermine him. Li Nanheng moved his handsome brows with a faint smile. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be particularly embarrassed, he simply didn't say more, crossed his arms over his chest and leaned there leisurely, but his eyes were all focused on Feng Ling. If Li Nanheng hadn't insulted his own grandfather in public for Feng Ling, the members of the base present would never have seen such a down-to-earth side of Boss Li in their lives. Even Feng Ling herself would never have thought of it. She hurriedly said, "Recently, because of the newcomers, I'm really busy. I'm afraid that if I casually agree, if I really can't find time to go, Elderly will think that I'm not sincere, and I must come to thank you." "What are you thanking me for? We'll be family in the future." Ah Feng suddenly interrupted from behind. When Feng Ling turned to look at him in surprise, he winked at her with a particularly serious expression, indicating for her to hurry up and leave the stage. "Thank you, Elderly, for your kind invitation. I'll definitely find time to go over." "Thank you, Mr. Li." However, she definitely couldn't say anything about the Li family, granddaughter-in-law, or family. She could only nod sincerely at Old Master Li. Old Master Li was satisfied and nodded. "All right, it's settled then." "Settle what?" The second son of the Li family lowered his voice and asked, "What's wrong with this Feng Ling? Brother, didn't you say that it would be impossible for her and Nanheng in this lifetime? Didn't you say that if Nanheng dared to marry her into the Li family, you would break his legs and sever their relationship? What kind of trick are you playing now?" Li Junyan did not explain. He only turned his head and said in a low voice, "I came here today because I wanted to see how the lass is doing right now. I'll tell you when I get back." The three old men couldn't understand it all, but hearing this they could only give up. Even after the people in the base hall dispersed, Feng Ling still hadn't realized what she had just experienced. When she was about to walk out of the base hall, the man suddenly patted her on the head. She suddenly came back to herself, turned around, and almost bumped into the arms of the man behind her. She quickly steadied herself and looked inside from Li Nanheng's side. The members of the base had all dispersed, but the elders of the Li family were talking to Ah Feng inside. Li Nanheng actually did not go in to accompany them. Feng Ling subconsciously wanted to walk out, but Li Nanheng reached out and pulled her back into his arms. "Why are you hiding? What are you afraid of? Elder Li is inside. You've even acknowledged him as your granddaughter-in-law. Even if they are standing by the side, you can still hug him. Behave yourself. Don't keep thinking about running away." Li Nanheng held her in his arms and looked at her dazed expression. He said lazily, "You've already been publicly acknowledged by the elders of the Li family. What else do you have to avoid?" The man's arm hugged her back heavily. Feng Ling leaned into his arms. After 2 seconds of silence, she did not struggle free. Li Nanheng was satisfied. He stroked the back of her head. Now, have you resolved all your problems with the Li family? Feng Ling, I didn't have any problems. Although the elders were indeed a little too ruthless, they didn't specifically target me. After I left the base, they didn't pay attention to me again, nor did they send anyone to block my way. This means that they just didn't accept women in the base and didn't have any other thoughts. What problems can I have? Li Nanheng rubbed her head again. He knew that she was stubborn, but he also knew that she really didn't take it to heart. Now that nothing in the outside world will disturb you, it's time to solve your own problems. What problems do I have? Feng Ling raised her head in his arms. The man lowered his head to look at her. As their eyes met, he looked into her clear eyes. Remember what I said? After the newcomer assessment, I will show you something? Feng Ling nodded. Come to my room tonight. I'll show you. Feng Ling, the man raised his eyebrows and pinched her shoulder. What are you thinking about? Your period hasn't ended yet. What else can I do? Feng Ling thought for a moment in his arms. I see. I'll go over tonight. The man curled his lips. Seeing that she was so obedient and cooperative in front of him, he was about to kiss her on the forehead. However, before she could kiss him, Ah Feng's coughing suddenly sounded behind her in a very incongruous manner. Hearing that it was Ah Feng, the veins on Li Nanheng's forehead throbbed. He pressed Feng Ling's head into his arms and turned to look at Ah Feng as though he was looking at a dead man. Hurry up and say it. Ah Feng was very embarrassed and his expression was very flustered. The old master is looking for you, not me. Feng Ling won't be lost in the base. The old master wants to talk about the military. I think this matter is quite serious. Li Nanheng? He rubbed Feng Ling's head hard. He felt that she wished she could crawl into his body to avoid Ah Feng's gaze. He whispered in her ear, go back to the training team first. Remember to look for me tonight. Chapter 1233. It was really difficult for Feng Ling to establish her authority this afternoon. However, everyone in the team knew her temper, especially those who liked to stir up trouble. Therefore, even though they heard all kinds of rumors in the base and heard that Grandfather Li publicly recognized her as his granddaughter-in-law, they only dared to take time to look at her expression during training. They saw that her eyes and expression were normal, but she didn't seem to be in a bad mood. Relatively speaking, she should be in a good mood, but they couldn't see anything else. Finally, it was evening. Seeing that it was almost time, Feng Ling quietly avoided Ah Feng's sight and did not return to the base hall but went to Li Nanheng's residence. From a distance, she saw that the light in his room was on. Feng Ling walked over and met Xiao Su on the way. Seeing the direction she was going, Xiao Su smiled at her and chuckled for a while with an expression that said, "It's okay, you can go wherever you want. I'm not Ah Feng. I definitely won't tell on you." Feng Ling entered Li Nanheng's residence and knocked on the door twice and the door opened. Li Nanheng had just taken a shower and came to help her open the door. He was not wearing a shirt but only a pair of black trousers. His perfect figure and well-defined muscles flashed in front of her eyes. "I knew you would come back tonight, so I took a cold shower first in case I turned into a beast as soon as I saw you." The man still had a towel on his shoulder. He picked up the towel with one hand and wiped his short hair while speaking. At the same time, he opened the door and motioned for her to come in. It had been a long time since she entered his room. Feng Ling walked in and saw a portfolio on the table closest to the door. Her eyelids twitched when she saw the words DNA on the portfolio, followed by a string of English words. She stood rooted to the spot. Li Nanheng closed the door, walked to her side, put down the towel in his hand and casually tugged at his short black hair, saying, "The truth you want to know is inside. If you are ready, open it. If you are not ready, leave it here and come back when you want to see it." Even if she had guessed what Li Nanheng wanted to show her at the beginning, when she really had to face everything, she would be at a loss. Even if she was Feng Ling, it was the same. But since he was already here, there was no difference whether he went a minute earlier or a minute later. Feng Ling only stood there in silence for half a minute before she walked forward, picked up the file, opened it, and took out a stack of standard A4 papers. It was written in English and some medical terms, but she had grown up in the United States, so of course she could understand it. After reading it carefully, she silently put the document back on the table. The man's voice came from behind her. "When you were 1 year old, your parents went out to deal with business. Because you were too young and had not weaned, they could only carry you. However, on the cruise they accidentally dropped you into the sea. This daughter that they could not hold tightly was the pain of their life. For the past 20 years they have never slept in peace. So regardless of whether you want to reunite with your family or not, at least you should know that you are not an abandoned orphan. It's just that they all thought that you were gone. Feng Ling slowly clenched her hands into fists and then slowly loosened them. After a moment of silence she said, "So why did Feng Mingzhu suddenly attack me?" Li Nanheng knew that Feng Ling didn't want to go back to the Feng family. She didn't want to come into contact with those complicated family struggles. He looked at her. "Because you didn't grow up together. She doesn't have any kinship with you, only grudges and wariness. What she can see is not blood kinship but conflicts of interest. If you are not here, she is the only child of the Feng family, the only daughter who can inherit everything. If you are here, everything will change." When he said this, Li Nanheng could imagine how uncomfortable Feng Ling would feel. However, there were some things that she could avoid, but there were some things that she had to face. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes. What he really wanted her to face was her true identity. It didn't matter whether she returned to the Feng family or not, but she had to know that she was not an abandoned orphan. She had to know that there were still many people in this world who thought of her and loved her. She also had to know that her surname was really Feng Ling. She was the second daughter of the Feng family, the wife that he had married by chance. Although it was not official, such a coincidence was the greatest help to him, and it was also the greatest luck in his life in the past 28 years. After the incident with the jade pendant, Feng Ling had thought about her relationship with the Feng family many times. She had also thought about whether she would reunite with her family in this life and under what circumstances. However, she never expected that Li Nanheng had already known everything. When she was ready, he placed the truth in front of her. Without giving her any time to be shocked or helpless, he tore apart the truth and placed it in front of her. Li Nanheng had also thought about Feng Ling's attitude after knowing her background, but there was nothing. She was much calmer than he had imagined. That night, she left with the DNA test results. After returning, she didn't say anything. She didn't even answer his call. However, the next day she returned to normal. She did what she should say and do as though she was not affected by her background at all. She also did not mention her relationship with the Feng family, as though nothing had happened. In front of Li Nanheng she was the same as before. There was no difference at all. Half a month later, someone came uninvited. Of course, 11 base was not a place that anyone could enter casually. Feng Mingzhu clamored outside the base to see Feng Ling but was stopped. One day she was even forcibly sent away by the base. However, the next day she continued to come and no longer made a fuss. She just waited outside and said that she wanted to see Feng Ling. A few days later, Feng Ling learned about this from the newcomers who had been out of the base for a few weekends. When she walked out of the base, she saw Feng Mingzhu's car parked outside, about dozens of meters away from 11 base. The windows were closed, and when Feng Ling finally appeared in front of the door, the window of the driver's seat rolled down. Feng Mingzhu took off her sunglasses in the car and glanced at her from afar. Suddenly, she started the engine angrily, stepped on the accelerator and drove toward her. Feng Ling stood expressionlessly in front of the base. The two men on duty outside the base subconsciously rushed forward, but the car was too fast and rushed toward the door. Feng Ling did not dodge. Her eyes were cold and unruffled. The car suddenly stopped less than 2 centimeters away from her. A strong gust of wind blew against her short hair, but her eyes remained indifferent and calm. There was not the slightest hint of fear in her eyes. Chapter 1234. Seeing that Feng Ling was not afraid at all and didn't even frown, Feng Mingzhu angrily slammed the steering wheel, abruptly opened the car door and got out. She rushed up to her and raised her hand to slap her, but Feng Ling casually raised her hand and caught her wrist. Feng Mingzhu struggled hard but failed to get her wrist out of her hand. She was so angry that her face turned pale. "Miss Feng, isn't the way you greet me a bit too vulgar?" Feng Ling looked at her coldly and swung her hand forward. She let go of Feng Mingzhu's hand, but she staggered back a few steps before she could stand firm. Feng Mingzhu became sober because of the pain in her wrist. She closed her eyes and abruptly raised them to look at Feng Ling. When she planned to come to Feng Ling 2 days ago, she had already thought about how to deal with her. At least, she couldn't be too emotional and her words must be reasonable so as to hit her. However, she was blocked outside for several days and no one went in to inform her. If it weren't for a few newcomers in the base who didn't understand the situation, she might not have been able to see her. If they didn't want anyone to go in or contact with the people inside 11 base, they could really do it in such a way that no one could think of any other way. Fortunately, Feng Ling came out on her own. Seeing her come out, Feng Mingzhu was so angry that she wanted to knock her to death. She knew that she couldn't beat Feng Ling, who came from 11 base. The only weapon she had was a car. There was really no other way but to hit her with the car. Feng Mingzhu was so angry that she wanted to knock her to death. But Feng Ling didn't even dodge, and the coldness in her eyes was close to contempt. She didn't take her seriously at all. Feng Mingzhu took 2 deep breaths, barely stabilized her emotions, and suddenly said, "Do you know why I came to you?" Feng Ling's eyes were indifferent. "Just say it." Feng Ling didn't need to hide at all. This was 11 base. Unless Feng Mingzhu really didn't want to live, if she dared to cause trouble in front of 11 base, she would implicate a lot of people. No matter how impulsive and stupid she was, she wouldn't be so reckless. Feng Mingzhu's expression darkened. She stood in front of her, only to find that even though she was wearing 5-centimeter high heels, she was barely as tall as Feng Ling. Some time ago, I accidentally heard about this from my grandmother and mother's conversation. Feng Mingzhu stared into her eyes. "Are you really my younger sister who should have died early?" Feng Ling did not speak or answer. If Feng Mingzhu hadn't gotten the evidence, she wouldn't have sent someone to kill her in the hotel, and she wouldn't have waited outside the base for several days just to see her. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't speak according to her plan, Feng Mingzhu couldn't get anything out of her. She chuckled coldly and looked at her. "You know it yourself, don't you? When did you find out about your past? Do you know that you're the daughter of the Feng family and my sister?" Feng Ling furrowed her brows in displeasure because of her long-winded words. "You came to find me just for these useless words?" Feng Mingzhu choked and gritted her teeth in anger. She abruptly raised her hand to tug at Feng Ling's collar, but Feng Ling dodged her hand imperceptibly at the moment her hand was about to touch her clothes, not letting her touch. "You don't want to talk to me, but you're still willing to see me. It seems that although you don't have any feelings for the Feng family, you're actually very conflicted, aren't you?" Feng Mingzhu held back her temper and looked at her with a cold smile. "What's there to be conflicted about? Do you think that even if you have the blood of the Feng family flowing in your veins, even if you're really a child who fell into the sea but didn't die, what can you do? You haven't appeared in 20 years. Do you think that even if you stand in front of the Feng family's door now, you can integrate into a family?" Feng Ling's eyes were cold and her voice was calm and emotionless. "Miss Feng, your focus is very strange. Do I look like someone who is willing to stand in front of the Feng family?" Feng Mingzhu choked again. Then she suddenly smiled mockingly. "Feng Ling, you should be able to tell that I hate you very much, right?" "I can tell," Feng Ling replied coldly. "In the past, I hated you, but when I found out that you were my biological sister who should have died long ago, my hatred for you turned into hatred." Feng Mingzhu stared into her eyes. "You ruined me, Feng Ling. You ruined my originally happy and worry-free life. Your shadow has accompanied me since I was young. Do you know how much I hate you? Do you know how much I hate you? You should have died 20 years ago. Why did you suddenly appear now?" Feng Mingzhu raised her hand and pointed at Feng Ling's face. "It's because of you. That year you had an accident at sea. From then on, the atmosphere of the entire Feng family changed. The originally harmonious and happy family was filled with gloom every day. My grandparents who used to dote on me didn't even smile because of you. They didn't even have the mood to take me to the amusement park. They even invited a group of people to our house to send you off. Because of their longing and guilt for you, the entire Feng family is like the underworld. Ever since you were young for so many years, they would set up a mourning hall for you around your birthday every year. Do you know how disgusted I was every time I saw them holding the clothes you wore when you were young and sitting there to eat vegetarian food and chant Buddhist prayers for you? It's been 20 years. I haven't been forgotten for 20 years. I've also been tortured for 20 years." Feng Mingzhu gritted her teeth and pointed at her, glaring at her. "But if you die, then so be it. The person I hate is just a little brat who died early, but you're standing here alive and kicking. You even stole everything from me? What right do you have? A Feng Ling? What right do you have?" At this moment, Feng Ling recalled how she had curled up in the cave with a hungry stomach when she was young, shivering from the cold. At that time she seemed to, not wearing any clothes. A child raised by a wolf shuttled back and forth in the jungle naked every day. She did not know right from wrong and did not care about shame. She did not live like a human at all. She closed her eyes. The calmness that she had thought was torn apart by Feng Mingzhu. She asked in a voice so soft that it was almost inaudible, "What right do I have? But what did I do wrong? So much so that you still tried to kill me even though you knew that we were related by blood?" Feng Mingzhu's expression stiffened. She stared at Feng Ling in a daze. "What did you say?" Feng Ling opened her eyes and met hers. "Do you really think you did it flawlessly?" Feng Mingzhu's hands hidden in her sleeves gradually trembled. Chapter 1235. If it weren't for the Feng family, do you think your clumsy methods would really be able to protect you? Without the protection of the Feng family, you would have died countless times. Miss Feng, if you don't have enough IQ, you should know how to behave yourself and not do anything out of line. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to kill me, but I will also witness your stupidity. When Feng Ling said this, she stared straight into Feng Mingzhu's eyes. There was indifference in her gaze, and there was a hint of mockery in it. She deliberately kept a distance from her. In the base, when Li Nanheng learned that Feng Ling had gone to see Feng Mingzhu, he frowned coldly, put down what he was doing and turned to walk out. When he was about to walk out of the main entrance of the base, he saw that Feng Ling was still standing at a distance from Feng Mingzhu. She was still standing upright with her back facing the base. Feng Mingzhu was so angry that her eyes were about to pop out of her sockets. Li Nanheng could clearly see her. Feng Ling was a strong-willed person, but no matter what she was facing, whether she was happy or sad, whether she could hold on or not, she was used to not begging anyone. Even if it was him, she would not easily show her weak side in front of him. This habit of hers was not good, very bad. Miss Feng, you have your resentment, but I don't seem to be in the wrong. Even my fate is passive. I passively accept the fact that I am an orphan, and I passively accept the fact that I am your sister. I don't remember blocking your path. You said that I destroyed everything you had and stole everything from you? I, Feng Ling, don't seem to have anything else other than the 11 base behind me, nor have I stolen anything from you. Feng Ling said indifferently, I advise you to guard your Feng family well. Don't provoke me in the future. I'm not interested in your Feng family. Your Feng family. Feng Ling's tone and attitude clearly showed that she had no intention of going back to acknowledge her. It was as though she wanted to bury the truth in her stomach and did not want to mention it to anyone. Feng Mingzhu stared at her for a long time before she suddenly sneered. Do you think you didn't steal anything from me? She abruptly took a step forward and pressed close to Feng Ling, looking at her face to face. Her voice was filled with hatred and unwillingness. The man I loved the most since I was young has already been snatched away by you. What else do you want to snatch from me? I have loved Li Nanheng for so many years, but he would rather marry you, a dead man's cenotaph, than marry me. How absurd. The dignified young master Li married the cenotaph of a dead baby girl. The Li family even moved your cenotaph into the ancestral hall. Isn't that funny? Feng Ling's eyelids instantly trembled. Ever since she saw Feng Mingzhu outside the door, this was the first time she looked at her seriously with some surprise. Seeing Feng Ling's expression, Feng Mingzhu sneered. Don't tell me you don't know about this? Feng Ling did not speak. She restrained her emotions in time. I was wondering why he suddenly said those words at the Feng family that day. What did he mean by not marrying another woman? Feng Mingzhu paused and then smiled coldly. It turns out that he already knew at that time. Feng Mingzhu then spat to the side. Despicable. Feng Ling did not speak for a while. On one hand, she was digesting what she had just learned. On the other hand, she was observing Feng Mingzhu in front of her. From her movements, she vaguely sensed that Feng Mingzhu's emotions were unstable. Last time, she heard from Madame Feng that Feng Mingzhu's emotions were unstable. Every day she would cause trouble at home. Later, she was taken abroad by her friends to relax, but after she returned, she clearly did not untie the knot in her heart and even dug into a dead end. Seeing her weak appearance, Feng Ling really did not have the patience to reason with her normally. However, Feng Ling did not come out in vain. At the very least, she now knew the reason. So 3 years ago, the so-called marriage alliance between the Feng and Li families, the marriage alliance that made her drink all night, was actually just her being jealous of herself? Li Nanheng actually married her own cenotaph. Miss Feng's emotions are unstable. Send her back. Feng Ling indifferently instructed the 2 base members in front of the door. Without wasting any more time here, she turned and left. I haven't finished speaking. Seeing that she was about to leave, Feng Mingzhu quickly took a step forward but was blocked by the 2 base members in front of the door. She was about to push her away in anger, but Feng Ling had already walked in without looking back. She had just walked back to the base and had only taken a few steps when a pair of black leather boots suddenly appeared in her sight. Looking up, she saw a pair of straight and powerful legs wrapped in black trousers. She paused, raised her eyes with a jerk and met Li Nanheng's eyes. She looked at him and suddenly did not know what to say. She kept her voice low and did not speak. Li Nanheng raised his handsome brows. Where is my little wife going? Feng Ling, In the past, when she heard the words little wife, she only thought that he was shamelessly teasing her. Now she suddenly realized that he really had a reason to call her that. In an instant, her heart violently beat several times. Then she thought of how she had been inexplicably jealous for so many years. She felt a little embarrassed. Without saying anything, she was about to walk away. However, the man reached out and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head to look at her embarrassed expression and laughed. If it was in the past, even if Feng Mingzhu waited outside to die, you wouldn't come out to see her. This time you came out first. Feng Ling slightly turned her head away because of the man's approaching breath. I'm not interested in anything else, she wants to say. Before I found out about her background, I didn't care about anything else. But in the past few days, I just wanted to know what kind of feelings and thoughts she had to use such a stupid method to deal with me, so I took the time to see her. So, the man's breath brushed against her ear. Seeing her uncomfortable expression, he guessed that she had found out something, but he did not point it out. He only whispered in her ear with a faint smile, "What conclusion did you come to?" What other conclusion could there be? Feng Mingzhu had grown up in the shadow of a dead sister. The disgust and hatred in her bones were too obvious. She didn't answer, but Li Nanheng clearly saw through her. He raised his hand and patted her shoulder gently. You're of the same bloodline and grew up in a different environment. That's why there's such a big contrast in personality. You grew up in a wolf cave, so you never asked for much, so happiness comes too easily. Some people don't have to worry about food and clothing. They have everything they want since they were young, but it's just because they want too much. Chapter 1236. Feng Ling was used to keeping silent about her own thoughts, especially the things she did not want to mention, so she did not continue to talk about this matter. After a moment of silence, she suddenly glanced at him and said, "So you married a 1-year-old baby cenotaph. What do you say?" Li Nanheng raised his brows. And? Feng Ling also raised her brows coldly. You married my cenotaph? Are you bullying a baby who died early for not being able to speak? Did you get my permission to marry me? Do you mean that I have to propose to you? Seeing that the little woman was really going to settle the score with him, Li Nanheng quickly held her in his arms. The Feng family and the Li family have an engagement. In the beginning they did force Feng Mingzhu into my hands, but at that time I was already dead set on wanting you. I definitely wouldn't want her. However, the engagement was still based on the power of the two families. In addition, I once blurted out the matter of the cenotaph. I had already been kidnapped by morality and I couldn't get rid of it. However, I couldn't really marry another woman behind your back. The best way to compromise was to marry the cenotaph of the Feng family's second daughter. This so-called marriage was actually just writing the second daughter's name into the Li family's ancestral hall in name. There was no actual marriage process. As you can imagine, it was just a few pieces of children's clothes. If I had known that the owner of those clothes was you, Li Nanheng said as he leaned down and kissed her ear. 3 years ago, I should have given you a nuptial chamber. Feng Ling turned to look at him because of his shameless words, but the man took the opportunity to bite her lips again. He did not bite hard, but his eyes were full of smiles. Although it was delayed for 3 years, it's not bad. After all, 3 years ago you were still young. Even if I had to hold it in, I couldn't bear to really sleep with you. Feng Ling smiled insincerely. You slept with me even earlier than 3 years ago. How can you say this? Li Nanheng pressed his lips against hers and said vaguely, That's because Fat Tai forced me to drink, so I'm not sober. If I want to sleep with you, I will definitely do it openly. Do I need to drink? As he spoke, he tangled his tongue with hers and said hoarsely, If it weren't for your young age, I'm afraid you would have been executed by me before you even reached the age of 17. All my patience in this life is on you alone. Are you blind or slow to react? Feng Ling thought that was why he had already done this and that in his mind when she was only a teenager. That was why every time she was on the training ground, he would always think of shameless things in his heart. She bit the man, but Li Nanheng smiled and pecked her lips. He touched her head. Little wife, you are my wife. Be gentle. Another month passed. During this month, Feng Ling still didn't mention the Feng family or her background. She didn't know if anyone had come to look for her. Anyway, if she didn't want to see them, no one could break into the base. She put all her efforts on the newcomers of Team 1. After another month of intensive training and intensive actual combat exercises, this group of newcomers finally fully entered the state of mind. In the second assessment, they all showed good results. 13 of the 20 people were officially accepted into the base, and the remaining people were given a third assessment opportunity for the first time. After finishing this task, Feng Ling did not tell anyone. She wrote 2 emails overnight, one to the base hall and the other to Li Nanheng's email. Then she left the base before dawn. The next day, when Ah Feng received Feng Ling's leave letter in the base hall, he was a little confused. Why did this person suddenly say that she wanted to take a leave of absence for a few months? Furthermore, she left without saying goodbye. Li Nanheng also saw Feng Ling's email the next day. There was only a simple paragraph. Boss, the newcomer training mission has been completed. I need time alone to sort out my life. It's rare for me to go out and relax. Don't worry, I'm in good condition. I just want to take a leave. Don't worry. Feng Ling's sudden disappearance made many people in the base confused, but when everyone was curious, Boss Li didn't say that he was looking for her, nor did he show any displeasure about Feng Ling's disappearance. He was so calm, as if Feng Ling didn't leave at all, or as if Feng Ling would come back soon and there was no need to worry at all. Boss Li did not mention anything, nor did he say that he would send someone out to search for her, so Ah Feng and the others could only give up. 4 months later. In the jungle near Malibu Beach, Los Angeles. In the cave, there were several wolf bones that had been weathered to the point that they could not be seen clearly. It had just rained outside the cave, but the leaves above the jungle were too dense. Even though it was raining heavily, only a few raindrops fell into the jungle. Outside the cave, there was a fresh smell of rain. It was damp, but it was clean and pleasant. It was the kind of cleanliness that couldn't be smelled in the hustle and bustle of the city. It was very warm inside the cave. It was spring and summer, so it wasn't very cold. It was raining outside, but there was a fire inside the cave. There were a few dry branches that were picked up a long time ago on top of a few charcoal stones. There were also a few pots and pans that had been washed very clean on the side. The water in the pot was boiling. Next to it was a flat stone platform about 2 meters long with a simple bedding. This was Feng Ling's bed. It was still raining outside. Feng Ling got up and moved her arms casually. She walked over and used a long stick to gently poke at the fire that was about to be extinguished. She then added a few pieces of dry wood into it. In just a few seconds the fire burned brighter. This was already the 3rd month she had lived in this jungle. In the first month after leaving the base, she really walked around and took the time to see Jinuan a few times. Later, Jinuan and the others returned to China, and Feng Ling did not see her again. Later, she returned to the jungle where she had lived before she was 5 years old. It was just that the pack of wolves here had been driven away by the intruders, and the remaining ones had either died or disappeared in the past 20 years, so the cave had long been empty. She was fiddling with the firewood and listening to the rain outside. Suddenly, she seemed to hear something. It sounded like someone's footsteps stepping on the grass nearby. She had been here for a few months and had not seen anyone. She was not sure if it was someone or some kind of animal in the forest that was approaching. When someone walked into the cave, she turned her eyes and saw a tall man casually throw the black travel bag in his hand onto the ground. The man's body was wet and cold. He raised his cold eyebrows and looked at her. "Little wife, can you sleep on this stone bed for 2 people?" Chapter 1237. The person she hadn't seen for 4 months suddenly appeared and even appeared here. Feng Ling couldn't figure out how he knew she was here. Although she had her cell phone with her, she hadn't charged it for a long time. She lived like a savage here all day. But after all, she had lived here when she was a child, so even if it was boring all day, she could still bear it. Originally, she came out to let herself go and do whatever was comfortable. But her cell phone was not turned on, and there was no GPS location. How did he guess that she was here? Li Nanheng was wearing a simple raincoat from 11 base, but this jungle was very big. He couldn't drive in. After walking for so long, his body was already wet. His head without a rain hat was wet, and his short black hair was dripping with water. However, his eyes were deep and bright as he looked at her. He looked at the little woman who was squatting by the fire, holding a wooden stick in one hand and looking at him in confusion. After a long while, Feng Ling blinked and looked at him. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. "You don't welcome me? Why?" She wanted to ask him how he found her, but after thinking about it carefully, Li Nanheng seemed to know more about her than she knew. Thus, she paused halfway through her sentence. She remained squatting by the fire and watched him. When the man approached her on the dusty ground of the cave, she couldn't help but raise her head to look at the tall man. Then she suddenly retracted her gaze and looked at the black travel bag he had thrown there. "I've been walking for the whole morning. I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" After not seeing each other for a few months, Li Nanheng was not unfamiliar with it. He casually unzipped his raincoat and placed it on the temporary wooden rack Feng Ling had placed by the side. He squatted down like her and reached out to warm himself by the fire as if he wanted to roast away the moisture on his body. Feng Ling looked at him again. Feng Ling looked at him again. It had been several months since he had spoken a word. For a moment, it was as though he could not speak. However, seeing that he was completely unaffected and watching him squatting by the fire, she stiffly and awkwardly pulled the stick back from the fire. Then she pointed the stick at the wild vegetables and fruits piled up in the corner behind her, as well as a wild rabbit. She poked the side again and pointed at the roasted earthworms she had hidden and was reluctant to eat. Looking at those things, Li Nanheng didn't show any signs of discomfort. Instead he sat on the ground. Sure. They're all good things. You can't even eat roasted earthworms outside. How would these Americans know how high the protein content in earthworms is? Feng Ling looked at him for a long time and finally found something to say. Li Nanheng, you left 11 base and came here with a travel bag to eat earthworms with me? Are you crazy? The man raised his hand and confidently fiddled with his short hair that had been drenched by the rain. His voice was low and comfortable. I've waited for 4 months. If I don't go back, I can only accompany you. All right, don't talk so much nonsense. I'm hungry. Hurry up and get me something to eat. As he spoke, he glanced at the fire again. How do you cook with this? Can you control the fire well? Feng Ling was expressionless. I can't say for sure, but at least I haven't starved to death here. What Li Nanheng was most satisfied with was that although she had lived alone in the jungle for several months, she had indeed kept herself fair and clean. She didn't lose any weight and even seemed to have gained a little weight. However, she had been very thin in the past. This so-called fat was still very thin, but at least the little dimples at the corner of her lips were much more obvious. All right, then do as you see fit. I'll eat whatever you cook. Feng Ling glanced at him again. He was already here. It wasn't right for her to chase him out now. Besides, it was still raining outside. She could only pour the water in the pot into another clean pot by the side and get up to pick up the wild vegetables to wash. Since Li Nanheng wanted to eat the roasted earthworms first, she would grant him his wish. In fact, this thing was really delicious. When she was young, she had eaten roasted dragonflies and found them delicious. She just didn't know if Li Nanheng could enjoy the delicacy of these insects. When she got up, she looked at the duffel bag he brought and asked, "Are you going to bring me a bunch of barbecue or something to eat like what you did at Rogers Pass?" No. Li Nanheng sat there and continued to warm himself by the fire. He said leisurely, "You insist on going back to the jungle to experience primitive life and use this method to calm your heart. I can't disrupt your plan. The bag is filled with my clothes and some tools." Tools? What tool? Feng Ling wasn't particularly curious. Without waiting for him to answer, she continued to prepare the food. Li Nanheng didn't answer. He just looked at the cave she lived in and then at the stone platform that was about 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. It was long enough but not wide enough. After looking at it for a while, he said, "If 2 people sleep on this stone bed, I'm afraid they can only hug each other to sleep." Feng Ling. She turned her head and glared at him. "Just come over and take a look. I'll go back sooner or later. Do you really want to live here? Why can't you live here? Don't you care about 11 base? Of course, but my wife is here. I can't leave my wife alone." "I don't care." After not seeing him for several months, Feng Ling was a little embarrassed. Li Nanheng could tell that even when she got up to leave, she still kept a distance from him. He just smiled but raised his eyebrows because of her words. Feng Ling also realized that she had admitted that she was his wife, so she immediately shut her mouth and didn't speak anymore. When she squatted down to prepare the roasted earthworms, her movements were a little angry. These were the roasted earthworms that she had saved up with great difficulty over the past few months. It was especially difficult to dig them out, and it was more difficult than hunting other wild animals. However, he actually wanted to eat roasted earthworms as soon as he came. He even knew that these things were rich in protein. As expected of the young master of the Li family, he always picked good things. As she busied herself, she felt that this world that belonged to her had suddenly been invaded by a man who had been running amok ever since he entered her life, making her heart restless. Right now she was restless, so she simply found a topic. "I haven't contacted Mrs. Mo recently. I don't know how she is now." "She went to England." Feng Ling paused and turned to look at him as if she didn't understand. Chapter 1238. Take care of yourself first. Li Nanheng didn't say much and only reminded her. Feng Ling paused. Only then did she see that her hand almost touched the pot of boiling water. She quickly raised her hand and thought for a moment. She didn't say anything else and turned to continue working. However, she really didn't expect Jean Wan to go to England. When she was still in contact with Jean Wan, she only knew that she had returned to China with Mr. Mo. She didn't know what happened to Mr. Mo after he woke up in the hospital. He seemed to have mentioned divorce. At that time Jean Wan was haggard. Feng Ling originally planned to go to High City to accompany her, but Xiaoba and Xia Tian said it was okay. They would accompany Jean Wan and let Feng Ling do what she needed to do in America. If there was no need to go to High City. After confirming that Jean Wan was fine, Feng Ling returned to the jungle. After living here for a few months, she didn't expect Jean Wan to go to England. It seemed that she should find time to charge her phone and ask High City what was going on. She was busy making food for Li Nanheng. After roasting by the fire for a while, the man stood up, walked a few steps in her small cave, walked to her stone bed and touched the thin, simple bedding on it. The height of this cave was not suitable for him. In the past, when the wolves lived here, no matter how tall they were, they wouldn't be as tall as a human, especially not as tall as Li Nanheng. Although the space was large enough, compared to the houses in the city, this cave was at least 60 square meters in size. However, the height was a little low, so when the man stood up and walked in, it was even lower. He needed to lower his head slightly when he entered. Seeing that Li Nanheng was only sizing up everything in her cave, Feng Ling didn't say much. Anyway, she didn't have anything else. Leaning against the stone bed, there was a duffel bag near the inner side. It was her own, and there were only a few pieces of clothes in it. Recently, her clothes had been washed in a clear stream in the nearby jungle. She usually washed and bathed there. After all, there was no one here and she wasn't afraid of being seen. When she was young, she had been there. Now, she occasionally went to the clear stream to wash clothes and throw stones. She felt that it was quite interesting. However, Li Nanheng probably couldn't understand this kind of interesting point. After all, these were all tricks she played before she was 5 years old. It was very childish. After she finished roasting the earthworms, she turned around and saw that the man was already sitting on her stone bed. At the same time he was looking at her. She turned her head and looked at him. "If you're tired, rest for a while. I don't have any staple food here. If you need it, I'll think of something." "No, it's all the same. Don't. I just ate these things when I was young, so I'm still used to them now. It's enough to taste the freshness. I'm not used to it." As Feng Ling spoke, she rummaged through a small bag by the side and found a bag of noodles. This kind of noodles had been stored for a long time and generally wouldn't go bad. It would become soft when boiled in water. She took it out and put it into the pot to cook as she said, "Thankfully, I brought some salt and seasonings when I came in. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be able to eat it." Li Nanheng looked at her expression as she squatted by the fire to cook seriously and chuckled. "If you can eat it, I can eat it." Feng Ling glanced at him. "Before I was 5, I could still eat those tasteless things, but after so many years outside, my taste buds have long become normal, so when I came back, I specially brought some seasonings. Otherwise, if it really has no taste, I won't be used to it." Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and did not say anything more. He just looked at her with a smile. After not seeing her for several months, he finally saw her again. It was as though he didn't need her to do anything at all. He just needed to watch her hugging her knees and squatting there for hundreds of hours. Feng Ling could feel Li Nanheng's gaze. She slightly turned her face away to avoid looking at him, picked up a small wooden stick, and gently poked it a few times in the fire. In the domestic martial arts movies she watched on TV, there were often plots in which the protagonist fell into a big pit or was trapped in a cave. It was also very common to set up a fire in a cave, but in fact if she really cooked on the fire, the smoke would be very big and fill the entire cave. Feng Ling was afraid of choking Li Nanheng, so when the smoke rose she quickly picked up the fan and kept fanning the fire toward the entrance of the cave. Watching her meticulous movements, Li Nanheng watched for a while and walked over. While Feng Ling was still fanning the smoke, he suddenly hugged her from behind. Feng Ling's body froze because of the man who suddenly hugged her from behind, and she almost dropped the fan in her hand. When the man hugged her, he bent down and breathed on the sensitive part of her neck. She subconsciously shrank her neck, looked at the fire under her feet and hurriedly said, "I'll fan it. Otherwise the cave will be full of smoke." "You're very comfortable here." The man only hugged her. He knew that she wouldn't be used to his excessive enthusiasm after not seeing her for several months, so he restrained his urge to strip her naked. He held her ribs obediently and rested his chin on her neck and shoulder. "Do you know how I spent the past few months in the base?" Feng Ling did not speak but looked at the fan in her hand. After pursing her lips for a while she said, "I said I'll go back." This sentence seemed to be a promise. She had said it once just now and now she said it again. In fact, she just wanted to say that she wouldn't be here for too long. There were still many things she cared about in 11 base and of course, Li Nanheng was the most important. She just wanted to give herself some time. But it seemed that this time was a little too long. A few months had passed in the blink of an eye. She enjoyed the stolen peace here every day, watching the sun rise and set every day, but neglected Li Nanheng's waiting, especially this man. No matter how patient he was with her, if she didn't go back, the limit of his patience should be almost used up. And I know. The man didn't say much because of her words, but still hugged her like this. Feng Ling knew what he meant. She didn't turn back to push him away but stood there and gently fanned the fan in her hand. After a long while she said, "Well, don't you feel that the smoke is very choking?" "I don't think so." "Your adaptability is really strong or is your sense of taste failing?" "I feel very choked," she said as she shook the fan hard. The man pressed against her neck and chuckled softly. "It's not failing. I can still smell the fragrance on your body." Feng Ling, she abruptly turned around in his arms, raised the fan in her hand and patted his head. "Let go, the noodles are about to be cooked." Chapter 1239. It can be eaten even if it's cooked. The man did not dislike it at all, but he did let go of her. This kind of smoke needed to be fanned out. It was fine to smell it once or twice, but after a long time, even if it wasn't poisoned by the smoke, it would still cause some harm to the body. Feng Ling still knew how to get the smoke out, which meant that she had been living alone for the past few months. At the very least she knew how to take care of her body. With both hands free she quickly squatted down and fanned the fire on the fire. She put the washed wild vegetables and the various bird eggs she had picked up in the jungle into the pot to cook. She also added some seasonings. In less than 2 minutes the pot of noodles emitted a unique fragrance. Even if they cooked the same noodles, the noodles cooked with a bunch of wild vegetables and a bird's egg in the jungle would definitely taste different from what they usually ate. The taste would be even more delicious. She asked Li Nanheng to eat noodles and roasted earthworms. Seeing that he didn't mind at all, he quickly ate a lot of the roasted earthworms she had hidden, and the noodles in the bowl were also eaten clean by him. Feng Ling fell into deep thought. If this man only missed her and wanted to stay with her for a day or two, it was fine. However, if he really planned to stay with her, how many earthworms would she have to dig and how many bird eggs would she have to pick up to support him? Would he really force her to climb a tree to dig a bird's nest? Feng Ling went to the stream to wash the tableware and pot and brought back some water. The stream in the jungle was very clean, but the water flow was a little rapid. Every time it splashed, her pants would be wet. When she returned to the cave, she suddenly saw the man holding her 2 fans by the fire. She didn't know what he was thinking. She glanced at him and saw that he was sitting there. She guessed that he was tired, so she didn't ask more. She turned to continue packing her things. When she turned back, she saw that the man had tied the handles of the 2 fans together and then rubbed them back and forth in his palms, fanning them above the fire. Seeing that he was fanning back and forth, the new smoke floating above the fire spread out faster. Feng Ling said, "I heard Kay and the others say that men are naturally interested in hands-on operations. Are you trying to make me a manual blower?" Li Nanheng did not speak. He was still studying the 2 fans seriously. Seeing that he was focused on the structure of the 2 fans, he was no longer sitting cross-legged like Boss Li in 11 base, nor was he Mr. Li of the Li Corporation. Instead, he was like a big boy who had released his nature after returning to the forest. Feng Ling's heart suddenly felt as though something soft had been injected into it. After packing up her things, she leaned against the side and watched him. She watched as the man used the ropes, wooden sticks, the daggers she usually sharpened, and the 2 knives she had taken out. He was studying them over and over. After about an hour, the first blower in the cave was successful. The man turned the handle made of a wooden stick behind the small thing he built with a wooden stick. After turning it a few times, the 2 fans fixed inside began to rotate in the direction of the fire regularly. He did not use much strength, and the wind speed of the fan was several times faster than that of a manual fan. The smoke inside soon dissipated. Seeing that his results were not bad, Feng Ling didn't know what she was thinking. She just leaned against the side and looked at his profile. She felt that this place that belonged to her when she was young was suddenly occupied by this man. She picked up a wild fruit, wiped it clean, walked over and brought it to the man's mouth. The man was still playing with the small blower in his hand. He opened his mouth and took a bite of her hand. Then his brows instantly furrowed and he abruptly turned to look at her, only to see that Feng Ling was smiling so brightly that her eyes were curved. "Sour, right?" she asked. She did not continue to let him eat. She picked up the wild fruit he had just taken a bite of and placed it by her mouth to take a bite. Even when eating such a sour fruit, she was still smiling as though she was in a good mood. Li Nanheng swallowed the mouthful of fruit in his mouth and raised his sour brows. He put down the thing in his hand and glanced at her loose cotton trousers. "Why are you wet?" "It's fine. Usually when I go to the stream I get splashed with some water. It dries up by the fire." Feng Ling did not mind. After eating the fruit, she clapped her hands and squatted down to pick up the thing he had just made. She shook the simple handle at the back a few times and found that it was really good to use. "Not bad, Bosley. Your hands-on ability is really strong." Before she could finish speaking, her waist suddenly tightened. The man took advantage of her squatting beside him and pulled her into his arms. Feng Ling lost her balance and fell onto his lap. The man held her shoulder and lowered his head to kiss her ear. He said meaningfully by her ear, "Other than my hands-on ability, I'm also very strong in other aspects. Don't you know that?" Feng Ling, in this forest, this kind of silent and ambiguous atmosphere really made one's heart tremble. It really made one's entire body sensitive. She quickly got up from his arms and squatted back to his side. She calmly fiddled with the newly made Li-style manual blower. Seeing her stern expression, Li Nanheng chuckled and raised his hand. His slender fingers combed the hair by her cheek. Looking at her hair that had grown so long that it was almost close to her neck because she had not gone out to trim it in time in the past few months, he asked with a smile, "Shy again?" Feng Ling's face was slightly itchy. She raised her hand and slapped his hand away. "Stop fooling around." Feng Ling, who dared to live alone in the jungle for several months and dared to associate with snakes, insects and beasts, would only show the shy side of a little woman in front of him. Li Nanheng smiled because of her, "Stop fooling around." He raised his hand and pressed the top of her soft hair as if coaxing a child. 11 Base's goddess of war, Feng Ling, is so thin-skinned. Who would believe it? Feng Ling raised her hand to push his hand away and quickly combed her messy hair back. She then picked up the wooden stick on the ground and poked at the fire in front of her. She was still wondering when this man planned to leave. If she couldn't, she would take advantage of the rain outside to find something to eat. "When are you leaving?" Thinking of this, she asked directly. There was a crackling sound on the fire. Li Nanheng watched her unconsciously poking back and forth. His lips curved slightly and he reached out to hold her hand that was still holding the wooden stick. "You still want to chase me away? Do you think my skin is as thin as yours? Since I'm already here, how can I leave? Unless you go back, from today onwards, this cave belongs to the Li family. Liera, dads please vote." Chapter 1240. With that, the man added, "Like you, change your surname to Li." Feng Ling. "When did I change my surname to Li?" Li Nanheng chuckled. "It's a traditional virtue of the Chinese. After the woman marries the man, the surname in front of her name will be the surname of her husband's family. Even in this era, there's no need to write the Li family's surname. Even if you're Chinese, you still have the blood of your ancestors. This is all left behind by your ancestors. Isn't it only a matter of time before your surname is Li? All you need is a formal proposal and marriage process. If you want it, come back to the Li family with me now. I'll satisfy you." There were the most Chinese people in the entire base, and the Li family and Feng family were also Chinese. Although they were in Los Angeles, they usually came into contact with Chinese people. Although Feng Ling didn't know much about this kind of thing, she had a rough idea. Of course, she understood what he meant by changing his surname to Li. Grandfather Li had personally gone to the base to invite her to the Li family as a guest and had clearly accepted her. She didn't know how long Li Nanheng had been a lobbyist for those old men when he returned home to make such a stubborn old man personally go to the base to treat her so well in public. In addition, she later learned about the cenotaph. It was really a coincidence. Their fate was already so coincidental. Coupled with the fact that their hearts were in each other's hearts, how could she not be willing to marry him? She couldn't shake the man's hand away, so she could only put down the wooden stick and then turn to look at him. The reason why Elderly accepted me is because he already knew that I was the second daughter of the Feng family? He knew that I was the cenotaph he married? Seeing that she had something to say, Li Nanheng raised his good-looking brows and looked at her. "Then if I refuse to return to the Feng family and refuse to accept the identity of the second daughter, will Elderly have any objections?" "No. At the same time he tucked the hair sticking to her cheek behind her ear. Looking at her white ear, he touched the soft flesh under her ear. The Li family doesn't have so many complicated thoughts. As long as you break their original stubbornness, they won't care too much about these small details. As long as you give them a great-grandson as soon as possible, he will definitely be the treasure of the new Li family. If anyone dares to touch him, the 4 old ones will definitely rush out to protect him. Feng Ling, who was able to maintain a serious and calm expression, almost collapsed. Who wants to carry a child? After that, she didn't listen to the man speak again and suddenly stood up. The rain outside has stopped. I'll go get some wild vegetables and mushrooms and bring back some edible things. Don't wander around here. If you wander around outside, it's easy to get lost. Li Nanheng glanced at her. I'll get lost? Do you think I'm a 3-year-old? It's really wrong to compare yourself to a 3-year-old. When I was 3 years old, I wouldn't get lost here. Feng Ling muttered again and then found that she didn't know what she was talking about. When she saw the man sitting on the ground looking at her with a faint smile, she simply stopped talking and turned to walk out. The jungle was very fresh after the rain. Occasionally, there would be some rainwater falling from the top of the dense jungle. It was some rainwater that had accumulated on the leaves, but because it was too dense, there was not much that fell. Feng Ling often came out to pick wild vegetables and find wild fruits. This was her daily routine, but now that Li Nanheng was here, she would deliberately get more. When she walked back with a basket of vegetables, fruits, and a few bird eggs, she vaguely heard some movement in the cave. She subconsciously walked back, but as soon as she approached, she saw that Li Nanheng had cleared the tall grass near a large area outside her cave. He had also flattened the ground and used flat stones to pad the ground, forming a large square ground. It looked as neat and clean as the cobblestone ground that could often be seen in the city. At the same time, she saw that the man had cut down an old tree that had withered for many years not far away. It had only been more than 2 hours and he had actually broken that withered tree? Feng Ling looked at the neatly broken spot under the old tree in surprise. She then saw that the man had used something to smooth the various wooden boards. She saw that he had piled the wooden boards by the side and was busy stacking the stones by the side. She seemed to understand something and rushed over. You're not going to help me build a house, are you? The man had been busy for a long time, and his black t-shirt was soaked with sweat. Hearing that she had come back, he simply glanced at the things in the basket in her hand and then at her. It's not a big project to build a wooden house in such a place. As expected, he was really going to build a house for her. Looking at the large stones that he was embedding into the ground, she realized that he was making a simple foundation. This place was against the mountain wall and there was usually not much wind, so as long as the foundation was solid, it would be fine. There was no lack of soil, stones, and wood in this kind of place. However, Feng Ling was curious about how Li Nanheng had broken the tree so quickly. She didn't hear any sound of cutting trees, and it seemed that he had made a lot of wooden boards. Although this amount of wooden boards was definitely not enough in such a short period of time, this speed was already very fast. She thought of something, stepped over the pebbles on the ground and walked into the cave. Sure enough, she saw that the black travel bag he had brought had been opened. There were all kinds of tools inside, even the strong and sharp sharpening knives used to polish stones. Of course, because there was no electricity in this place, most of the tools were manual or electric. The tools he used to cut trees and cut boards were thrown aside. It turned out that these were the tools he was talking about. He actually brought a bunch of tools that could help her build a house in this jungle. Although this place was only a cave, everyone had a deep-rooted attachment to their childhood experiences. Even if the cave was already a pile of weathered wolf bones, she could not bear to throw them out. Li Nanheng deliberately hid here because he could tell that she needed to calm her heart, so he did not intend to take her back immediately. Instead, he prepared everything and came to the place where she had saved her life in her childhood to help her build a home that could shelter her from the wind and rain. At this moment, Feng Ling truly felt the feeling of being understood, being seen through, and being loved and doted on with all his passion and patience. Chapter 1241. It seemed that the heavens were not particularly cruel to her fate. Even though she fell into the ocean when she was 1 year old, even though she was a little wolf girl and had to disguise as a man to survive, even though her life was very hard, fate gave her a Li Nanheng who could smooth over all her past experiences. She looked at the tools on the ground and listened to the man patiently building the stones outside. She suddenly dropped the basket in her hand, turned around and walked out quickly. She rushed behind the man and suddenly hugged him from behind. The man paused and glanced back at her. What's wrong? Feng Ling buried her face in his back. She had never been good at expressing herself with words, especially when it came to feelings. When she knew that she really liked him, she chose not to be so passive and would respond to him. She would try her best to learn to cooperate and not hurt his heart. At this moment she was overwhelmed with emotions. She didn't know what to say. She just hugged his waist tightly through his sweaty clothes, but she couldn't speak. After being hugged by her for a while, Li Nanheng suddenly chuckled. He did not push her away but bent down to pick up the polished stones. He turned his head to look for a suitable place to embed them. At the same time he said, "It's nothing. Don't be too touched. This place is very important to me. I won't destroy it. I'll just connect a wooden house outside this cave and put it next to the cave inside. At least it's like a home. Even if I leave in the future, if I want to come back to take a look, there'll be a decent place to live." Feng Ling nodded and pressed against his back. After a long while she said, "Do you need any help?" Li Nanheng suddenly reached under his clothes and decisively took off his sweaty t-shirt. Seeing that the man was suddenly naked, Feng Ling looked at him with a flushed face. She didn't understand what he was doing in broad daylight, but the man just casually threw the clothes into her hands. "Help me wash my clothes and cook. I don't need anything else." "Feng Ling, you really treat me as a woman." Li Nanheng glanced at her. "Not a woman?" In this jungle, guns, sticks, and agility were useless. If it was really talking about building a house, Feng Ling really couldn't help much. Earlier she had seen the man's ability to do things and build structures. Right now she seemed to only be able to wash clothes and cook. Why did she suddenly have the feeling that she could plow the fields and weave the cloth? When Feng Ling lived here, she was self-sufficient and felt that she was quite powerful. Now she suddenly changed from an instructor to a woman who washed clothes and cooked. This change made her a little helpless, but when she saw the man's naked upper body and his sweaty back, she was even more helpless. She simply carried his clothes away and quickly to wash them for him. The smell of the man's sweat was not unpleasant at all. The clothes still carried his unique scent and a faint smell of tobacco. However, Feng Ling knew that Li Nanheng was a germaphobe, so she carefully washed him and hung him on the drying rack that she had temporarily set up with some long wooden sticks in the cave. After all, a house was a big project. No matter how fast she was and how many tools she had, it was impossible to build it in a day. After the stones and foundation outside the cave were laid, the sky was already dark. Li Nanheng went to the stream to take a shower. After showering he came back refreshed and relaxed. He was wearing the clothes in his travel bag. They were all simple and loose clothes. If she hadn't seen those tools, Feng Ling would have thought that he had come to the jungle for a vacation. She had already showered and was sitting in the cave to make food. In the past, when she was outside, she rarely had the chance to cook personally, and she didn't know how to cook. There were only a few simple things, but in this jungle she could only rely on herself for 3 meals a day. She couldn't eat takeout here, so she was used to this. However, with the sudden appearance of a man, it was as if there was something different in the peaceful and unchanging life of the past few months. She didn't know why she was jumping with joy in her heart. She was just very happy. She was just in a good mood. She could clearly feel that she was in a good mood. Also, when she saw that Li Nanheng had walked back safely after taking a shower and was sure that he really wouldn't get lost, she smiled and looked at the refreshed man. She placed the dinner she had prepared on the small stone table. "Boss, let's eat." Li Nanheng had already walked over and sat by her side. He took the bowl, picked up the chopsticks and lowered his head to take a bite. His posture was natural and casual, as though he had not just come from a big city like Los Angeles. Instead, it was as though he had lived in this place with her for many years. This kind of place is indeed suitable for eating and sleeping. It's really quiet. As Li Nanheng spoke, he glanced at the stone foundation outside the cave. "We'll continue tomorrow morning. The wooden planks that a tree can make aren't enough. Are there any other withered trees nearby?" "Yes, there are 2 more about 200 meters away on the other side. There are more nearby." Feng Ling put down the bowl in her hand and looked at him. "It's enough that you want to help me build a house. I appreciate it. There's no need to go through so much trouble." Li Nanheng sneered coldly at her polite words and continued to eat. After eating, he put down the tableware and glanced at her while eating. The light of the fire shone on Feng Ling's face, making her complexion look healthy and rosy. Originally, because they hadn't seen each other for a few months, he wanted to take advantage of the break to sit by the side and take a good look at her. However, as he watched her swallow her snow-white neck, the man's eyes gradually became uncontrollably hot. Feng Ling turned to look at him because of his gaze and met the man's gradually darkening gaze. She slowly shifted her gaze away and lowered her head to continue eating as though she hadn't seen anything. Originally her eating speed was normal. It was just that compared to the speed at which the man beside her ate, she was a little slower. However, right now she really slowed down without batting an eyelid. After a while she finished eating and put down the cutlery. There was nothing left to hold in her hand. After 2 seconds of silence she said, "I'll go wash the dishes." As she spoke, she was about to put away the cutlery and go out to bring it to the stream. She had just stood up by the fire and was about to take the cutlery out when she suddenly heard the man sitting by the side sigh with a smile. "It's already dark outside. Put it in the water first. It won't be too late to wash it tomorrow morning." Chapter 1242. Not only was it dark, but it also sounded like it was raining outside the cave, but it was not raining heavily. "It's raining. Will there be any problems with those wooden boards being wet?" "There's no problem. At most, there's moisture in the wooden boards. After the house is built, we'll leave it empty for 2 days before living in it. It's not a big problem." Hearing this, Feng Ling did not ask any more. She placed the cutlery in another basin with clear water by the side, washed it simply and placed it by the side. She planned to take it to the stream tomorrow morning to wash it properly. In the end, when she wiped her hands briefly, she turned back to see that Li Nanheng was still sitting cross-legged there. It seemed that he had not moved for a long time. He was just looking at her, his eyes never leaving her. Feng Ling had seen Li Nanheng many times. She had also seen many different gazes that belonged to him. However, it seemed that every time she saw his gaze, her body would soften. She put away her armor and wanted to take the initiative to approach him. She wanted to hug him with her passion, but she was not good at expressing herself, so every time she almost collapsed under his gaze, she would subconsciously want to divert her attention. However, it wasn't easy for the man to arrange the time and everything. He entered the jungle to find her and accompany her. In this place where there was no signal, even if he wanted to kill time with his phone, he would not give her a chance to divert her attention. When Feng Ling wiped her hands and walked over, he reached out to hold her hand and pulled her. Feng Ling was originally a little on guard and stood steadily. She subconsciously wanted to struggle back, but the man only held her and raised his cold and handsome brows at her. There was a faint smile in his eyes. She paused and relaxed her struggle. However, in this moment of hesitation, the man increased his strength and pulled her over into his arms. Feng Ling hit him hard in his arms and sat on his thigh. The man's lips rubbed against her hairline and he whispered in her ear, "Why are you hiding?" "Feng Ling. I didn't dodge." At the same time, she turned to look at him, but at this moment, the man planted a kiss between her brows, and then slowly moved down, landing on her eyelids. "I don't know how I survived these past few months. It's good. I'm enjoying a peaceful and happy life outside alone. I said that I would go back soon, but in the end, I haven't been seen for 4 months. I've changed from the mighty boss of 11 base to a wife-waiting stone. If it weren't for the fact that I'm so pitiful, do you think Ah Feng and the others would let me leave the base to look for my wife so easily?" Feng Ling pondered and felt that the reason why Li Nanheng was allowed to take a leave was definitely fake. With Ah Feng's personality, how could he do everything for the Li family in the base so easily? He must have used some other method. But no matter what method he used, he had indeed found this place. She leaned against his arms and did not move. She gently rubbed her head against his shoulder. "I'm sorry. I've been living here for the past few months and I've almost forgotten the time. I only realized that I've been gone for 4 months. Your apology is too insincere. I don't accept it." The man's tone was indifferent, but he did not let go of her hand. Feng Ling realized that this man was actually being arrogant. She immediately raised her eyes to glance at him, only to see that the man was looking down at her. Knowing that he was digging a pit for her to jump into, Feng Ling pretended not to know. "Then what do you want?" "What do I want?" The man hugged her waist tightly and pressed her against his chest as if hinting. At the same time, he lowered his head and pressed his forehead against hers. His warm breath pressed against her lips. "I want everything. I want this and that. Are you willing? When have you ever cooperated obediently?" Feng Ling blinked and did not speak. The man raised his hand to stroke the back of her head and looked deeply into her clear eyes. He was about to kiss her. When she subconsciously shrank her neck back, he did not give her a chance to dodge and decisively pressed the back of her head. In the end, Feng Ling's lips hit his heavily. The man accepted it with a smile and sucked her soft lips. The kiss was relatively calm. It was not the kind of kiss that he could not wait to press her to the ground and strip her naked. Instead, he kissed her patiently and finally kissed the corner of her lips. He stroked her slightly longer hair and pressed against her lips hoarsely. Just like this, take the initiative. When will you learn it? In the beginning, because they hadn't seen each other for several months, Feng Ling subconsciously felt a little embarrassed. Being held in the man's arms and kissed like this, the feelings she had in the past were also stirred up. She looked at him and felt that the man seemed to understand her very well. He was patiently drilling into her heart step by step. Even if he did have the most direct physical desire, he had always respected her when it was time for him to respect her. For example, right now, his eyes were clearly filled with desire, but he only hugged her, kissed her gently, looked at her patiently, and talked to her. Seeing that she had been leaning in his arms without saying a word or moving, Li Nanheng stroked her head comfortingly. I walked for a long time in the jungle before coming in. I've been busy with the wood and stones in the afternoon. I'm really tired. Let's sleep, but it's indeed a bit difficult for two people to sleep on this stone bed. When the house is built, I'll think of a way to get a bed. With that, he signaled her to lie down on the stone bed with his eyes. Sleep on it. I'll simply spread some hay on the ground by the side and sleep for the night. I see there's hay here. It should be able to be used. Tomorrow, before he could finish speaking, Feng Ling, who had been obedient in his arms, suddenly raised her eyes to look at him. Her eyes were bright and he couldn't tell what she was thinking. Just as Li Nanheng paused for a second because of her gaze, she suddenly raised her hands and wrapped them around his neck. She raised her head and kissed him. First, she kissed the man's firm and handsome chin, then she moved up and kissed his face. Then she moved to his lips and kissed him without hesitation. After all, she had been kissed by him so many times. No matter what, she had learned some tricks. She carefully used the tip of her tongue to pry open his lips. She felt the man's entire body tremble. The moment his gaze darkened, she hugged his neck tightly and refused to let go. It was as though she had experienced something new. She carefully used the tip of her tongue to gently lick the soft outline of his lips twice. Begging for monthly tickets. Chapter 1243. Although he said that he wanted Feng Ling to take the initiative, once she really took the initiative, even if it was just a kiss, even if it was just a simple tease, it could make the blood of the man who had been maintaining his rationality boil. In the mountains and forests, in the empty cave, there were occasional cries of unknown birds and beasts several miles away. The aura of nature surrounded the vicinity, and there was only a man and a woman hugging each other. The woman he loved the most was in his arms and she was still so proactive. No one could King stand it. Not to mention Li Nanheng, who had endured for who knew how long. Feng Ling probably only had the courage to take the initiative to kiss him. She didn't know how to proceed to the next step. She kissed the man until his entire body tensed up and his arms held her tightly like iron pincers. The man took the initiative to kiss her deeply. She had also taken a simple shower by the stream, and the two of them smelled clean and fresh. The crackling sound of the fire by the side was connected to the sound of the rain outside the cave. However, Feng Ling's face had turned warm and looked very soft. Li Nanheng couldn't help but wish he could turn into a beast right now. Feng Ling didn't expect Li Nanheng to be so decisive. By the time she reacted, Li Nanheng had already carried her to the stone bed she had slept on for several months. Although there was a simple layer of bedding on it, there was also hay under the bedding, so it wasn't very hard. When her clothes were almost torn by the man, she quickly raised her hand and said, "Don't, I only brought a few clothes. If I break them, I won't be able to wear them." The man's hand stopped moving, but he switched to other methods of attack. He let go of the buttons on her clothes and turned to kiss her neck passionately. He kissed her until her whole body was numb and she couldn't stop trembling from the arousal. It wasn't until she unbuttoned the first two buttons of her shirt that the man took the opportunity to strip her clothes off. In an instant she was completely exposed to the air from one shoulder to the back. He looked at her fair shoulder and kissed it. Feng Ling tilted her head slightly. Her eyes were red from the stimulation brought by the man. Her mind kept replaying the scene of herself curled up in this cave when she was 5 years old. At that time, no matter if she was cold or hungry, she could only stay here, waiting for the wolves to come back, or holding her growling stomach in a daze. Time had changed. At that time, she would never have imagined that one day, a man would come to this place because of her. He understood her feelings for this cave. He helped her build a house outside, stayed with her here, and even pressed her down on the stone bed that she used to lie on when she was young and stare blankly at it. Her response made the man on the verge of exploding, but as if he was afraid that she would catch a cold, he raised his hand and touched her waist. Even though he was about to explode, he still asked hoarsely, "Are you cold?" Feng Ling shook her head. "No." Hearing her reassuring answer, the man smiled and kissed her lips. "Don't worry. Even if you're really cold, I'll make you warm up." Right now, Feng Ling was already very hot. She did not say much, but since she had taken the initiative, she would treat this man she liked wholeheartedly. Her two slender snow-white arms were still tightly wrapped around his neck, refusing to let go. The man's hand moved down again and again, peeling off her remaining clothes. The stimulation his hand brought her was unimaginably strong. Feng Ling cried out involuntarily under his deliberate action. She then turned her head tremblingly to bite his shoulder. The expression on her face was unclear whether it was excessive pleasure or stimulation beyond the acceptable range. Although she forced herself not to make a sound, the way she trembled in his arms still made his blood boil. The man's movements did not stop. His lips were still kissing her. Gradually, from the initial gentle and lingering, he gradually lost control and became a little rough, but he was still trying his best not to hurt her. When he felt that he was about to lose control, he pressed his lips against hers and asked hoarsely, "Did you miss me?" Feng Ling closed her eyes. Her eyelashes trembled, and her face was full of shyness and sincerity. She made a light and hoarse sound. "It's good that you know you missed me." Li Nanheng kissed the corner of Feng Ling's mouth. The distance between them was so close that even their breaths were tightly entwined. "At least you're not so heartless. Seeing that this cave is equivalent to half of your home, I'll accompany you here until the day you untie the knot in your heart and are willing to return to the base with me, en?" As he spoke, he tried his best to use patience and gentleness to enter the topic of the bed on this stone bed. Feng Ling gradually tightened her grip on the simple bedding under her. She had not been like this for several months. Fortunately, he tried his best to be gentle. But in the end she still let out a sobbing moan. Li Nanheng stared closely at Feng Ling's expression. Seeing that her eyebrows gradually relaxed, the hair on her forehead was soaked with sweat, and her somewhat helpless expression because of the rising tide of emotions and feelings, waves of boiling emotions welled up in his heart. He wanted to stay like this forever. Even if it was in this wild forest, even if it was isolated from the world, even if she chose to return to this kind of peace and never leave, he was willing to stay here with her until the end of time, unwilling to leave. Looking at Feng Ling's expression under him, although she usually wore a calm and plain mask in front of others, she would only release her softness in front of him. She would have such a helpless and seductive look under him. She would support him and rush out of the enemy in times of danger, making him feel endless joy and satisfaction whether it was when he was sober or in this kind of pleasure. He loved this feeling so much that even his heart trembled. He kissed Feng Ling's sweaty face, from her forehead to the tip of her nose, from her lips to the corner of her mouth. It was as though he was holding his entire world in his arms. He sighed in her ear over and over again. "Feng Ling, I fucking love you so much that I almost forget who I am. You're mine. You're mine for the rest of my life. No matter if you're happy or unhappy, no matter if you're in 11 base or in any corner of the world, you can't push me away. Do you remember?" Feng Ling's face was covered in sweat, and her lips were wet with sweat. Feng Ling couldn't help but snort under the violent impact. She replied unsteadily, "Then what if you push me away?" The man chuckled and suddenly bit her lips hard. "Impossible." Chapter 1244. "Even if you put a knife to my neck, I won't let you go. How can I push you away?" Li Nanheng tightened his movements as though he was punishing her. Feng Ling's entire body trembled. It was as though a small electric current had passed through her entire body. Her entire body tensed up to the limit. "Gently, gently." She tried her best to suppress her voice. Don't. She couldn't hold it in any longer and her voice turned into a sobbing tone. When the man temporarily ended but did not intend to completely end it, Feng Ling recalled that the man had taken the initiative. She remembered that he had been rushing on the road today and had been busy outside, yet he still had such astonishing stamina. She was really impressed. Even though her entire body was numb and sore and she did not want to move, she still turned over beside the man, her eyes hazy from the tears. Li Nanheng turned to look at her. He had not had enough. He only planned to continue after resting for a few minutes, but when he saw the little woman in his arms and her flushed face, he was so seduced by her gaze that he did not even want to rest for a few minutes. He wanted to continue like this, so he smiled and kissed her cheek. "You make me feel like a hooligan who bullies the weak." Feng Ling glanced at him, and in the next moment, Li Nanheng's brows suddenly twitched. He was speechless because Feng Ling suddenly pushed him down, turned over, and sat on his lower abdomen. She panted and said condescendingly, "I'm not weak." Li Nanheng stared at her in shock, as though he wanted to confirm if Feng Ling, who had learned to take the initiative today, was really her. However, Feng Ling did not give him time to be shocked. She immediately moved back until she found the right position. She looked at him with bright eyes, clearly wanting to prove that she was not weak. She pressed down on him forcefully. She sat down. Everything that night was too crazy. Time seemed to pass especially quickly. By the time the two of them were exhausted and sleepy, the sky outside the jungle had already revealed the light of dawn. After an entire night of rain, there was still some cold air outside. If she went to Qingxi to take a bath at this time, she would definitely catch a cold. The two of them were indeed too tired to move. They couldn't even be bothered to wash up. He bit Feng Ling's ear and asked in a muffled voice, "Shall we shower together after we wake up?" Feng Ling did not answer. She was so tired that she had fallen asleep. In this jungle, there was no need to wake up early for morning training. There was no need to face the rules of time that one had to abide by outside. They could wake up whenever they wanted. The two of them fell asleep in each other's arms. Feng Ling was so tired that she tilted her head in his arms. In the end, Li Nanheng did not sleep on the hay on the ground. Although the stone bed was not wide enough, he could still sleep if he hugged her tightly. He was happy to sleep with her in his arms. Li Nanheng kissed her face again and fell asleep with satisfaction. For 4 consecutive days, except for being forcefully dragged back to the cave by Feng Ling at night to rest, Li Nanheng barely rested during the day. He had been busy cutting down withered trees and making wooden planks to build the house. 4 days later, the house had already taken shape. The roof had also been built, and several layers of wooden planks had been placed, mainly to prevent rain from leaking. Feng Ling also helped out in the past few days. She couldn't build the house, but she paved the ground between the house and the cave with stones. She then went to the jungle to dig some mud and mixed the stones with the soil to continue leveling. In the end, when the stones and soil were dry, the ground was like a floor made of pebbles. It was very flat and beautiful, and it gave off a very natural feeling. Feng Ling pulled a long line in the cave behind the house to dry the clothes. Previously it was just a simple wooden rack. Now she had more space to dry the clothes and place things. Li Nanheng's ability to survive in the wild was really strong. He even used the remaining yellow soil and cut flat stones she dug to build a stove in the cave. This way, when she cooked in the future, she didn't have to use the simple method of roasting on the fire. Instead, she could use the stove to cook. This was more convenient and there wouldn't be so much smoke. In the past, Feng Ling only wanted to return to this place to live alone and have some peace and quiet. She had never thought of building a house or doing these things here. Li Nanheng's arrival had made a qualitative leap in her life here. The two of them personally built a home with bricks and wood, filling Feng Ling's heart with bricks and wood. Feng Ling stood outside the house and saw that Li Nanheng was reinforcing the windows. She looked at him and said, "You've made this place so good. Even if I want to leave now, I can't bear to leave. What should I do?" Li Nanheng's hands did not stop. He continued to fix the wooden planks on the window and replied, "I'll stay with you as long as you want. Even if I go out in the future, I can accompany you back when I miss this place. You can't bear to part with this place, but can you bear to part with me?" For several days they lived together from morning to night. They worked together during the day and slept together at night. There was no one else staring at them and there was no need to be afraid of being shy. Feng Ling also no longer hid her feelings. She directly answered with a smile, "I can't bear to part with you." "That's right." The man nailed the wooden planks to the window frame and patiently hammered the nails as he said, "Wherever I am, that's your home. We can build a house here and we can also have our own place outside. You can live wherever you like. The important thing is that as long as I'm here, you won't be without a home, understand?" A person who had never had a home since she was young watched her own home being built with her own eyes. She heard a man say that wherever he was, that was where her home was. What could be more satisfying than this? After another day, Li Nanheng went to chop trees and cut wooden planks again. Feng Ling helped by the side and asked, "What are you going to do this time? Isn't the house already done?" "Bed," Li Nanheng said concisely. Feng Ling's gaze abruptly fell on the wooden planks in his hand and the wooden planks piled by his feet. Seeing these wooden planks, she knew that he was going to make a very, very big bed. She couldn't help but laugh. "I thought you enjoyed hugging me to sleep on the stone bed every day." "Yes, I do enjoy it, but it's not a long-term solution." Li Nanheng blew on the freshly cut wooden planks in his hand and said mildly, "That stone is 2 meters long, more than 1 meter wide, and it's not low. No matter how good my physical strength is, I'm not an immortal. Even if there are a few more Li Nanheng, I won't be able to lift it. I have to put a decent bed in this newly built house." Chapter 1245. Feng Ling nodded and felt that what he said made sense. At the same time she asked, "Then what should I do now? There are still a few hours before lunch. There's no need for me to boil water and cook now. Teach me how to use these tools. I'll help you, okay?" Li Nanheng stopped his movements and glanced at her. He saw that Feng Ling was sitting on the small stool made of a few remaining pieces of wood and looking at him with one hand holding her chin. He sighed with a smile. "I don't need your help. If you really have nothing to do, why don't you dance for me?" "Feng Ling," the man raised his eyebrows. "Why are you looking at me like this?" Feng Ling put down her hand and said with a stern face, "I don't know how to dance." He smiled. "Oh yes, you really don't know. Feng Ling, then why don't you do a set of boxing or those basic close combat moves from the base? It looks good when you link them together. Why don't you do it for me?" "No. You know how to do this. Why don't you do it?" "You taught me. In front of you, this is called showing off in front of an expert. If I do something wrong you'll scold me. I won't do it." Li Nanheng was amused. "I only scolded you when you first came to the base. At that time, your physical strength was indeed inferior to others, and some of your basic movements were not standard. Do you still hold a grudge against me after I taught you a few lessons?" "I'm telling the truth. You used to scold me a lot." Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him. Li Nanheng chuckled. He liked how she was less and less able to hide her emotions. "Then what should I do? I can't bear this grudge for a lifetime. Why don't I stay down for the next few nights? So that you can suppress my arrogance?" Feng Ling ignored him. She didn't know how to build a house or a bed, but she could make some small stools. She walked over and picked up a few pieces of wood that had been cut off. She found a few pieces that were relatively neat as though she had found a treasure. She quickly took them to the side and put them together to make some small stools or other simple things. Seeing that she had clearly begun to like making small things in the past few days, and then looking at her carefully studying a few wooden boards, Li Nanheng smiled faintly and continued to do the unfinished work at hand. The amount of work needed to build a bed was definitely not as huge as building a house. The house had to pay attention to all kinds of details such as waterproof and rainproof. There were also layers of boards inside and outside the house to block the wooden cracks and other auxiliary things. As for the bed, it was relatively faster as long as it was firm and sturdy. After Li Nanheng finished building the bed, he placed it in a suitable position against the wall in the room. Then he noticed that the room probably lacked a set of tables and chairs for eating. This was more or less enough. There was no hurry. Recently, Feng Ling also wanted to make some small things. He could slowly teach her how to make them and accompany her. This way she could also find some interest. The two of them had lived in the city for many years. In such a quiet life in the jungle where they didn't even need to turn on their phones, they didn't feel bored at all. In fact, they felt that this kind of life was so peaceful that they could let go of all the grudges outside. Feng Ling calmed down and did not mind much about the Feng family and Feng Mingzhu. After all, in the past 20 years she hadn't had any contact with the Feng family. It seemed that she had nothing to do with that family except for a blood relationship. Although Feng Mingzhu was extremely selfish and narrow-minded, the elders of the Feng family were not heartless people. In this way, Feng Ling did not have too many complaints, dissatisfaction, or hatred, nor did she have any feelings of being touched or thinking about. If she left the jungle one day and returned to the outside world, Feng Ling would go to the Feng family to take a look. If the Feng family insisted, she would go to the Feng family to take a look and personally remove her mourning haul. She would tell them that she was still alive and thank them for giving birth to her. She would return to the Feng family, but she would only acknowledge them. She would not stay in the Feng family. She would still be the same Feng Ling. If the Feng family chose to be quiet and not disturb her, she would remain silent and not reveal the truth. It would be best to maintain the status quo. Feng Ling knew that no matter how peaceful and happy her life in this jungle was, sooner or later she would still have to go back. Both of them had things to bear on their shoulders. This kind of peaceful life could only exist in books and stories. In reality, they both had responsibilities to bear. Feng Ling learned things very quickly. Although Li Nanheng had never learned any carpentry, men were all agile and had a natural sensitivity to these things, so he helped her build a house bit by bit. After she learned how to make the wooden boards, she spent a week building tables, chairs, and other small items with him. The wooden house that belonged to them was complete and did not even lack any furniture. After they officially moved in, Feng Ling opened the wooden cabinet in the house, took out a clean set of clothes that belonged to Li Nanheng and walked out. Before she walked to the stream, she heard the sound of water splashing. She craned her neck to look over, only to see Li Nanheng biting a blade of grass in his mouth. The tall and straight man was standing there bare-chested. With one hand he lifted the flowing water in the clear stream onto his body, while the other hand was on his waist. With the grass in his mouth, he looked like a grandfather who was the king of the forest. There seemed to be something moving around the man's feet. Feng Ling walked over and saw that it was a small wild boar. However, its two front trotters were tied to a rock with a rope, and it was struggling with all its might. She then looked at the man who was standing calmly by the side taking a shower. She didn't even need to think to know that this little wild pig had foolishly bumped into the leather boots of this man. Otherwise, how could he be tied up here so miserably? She walked over with a smile, squatted down, and placed the clothes in her hand on the clean rock by the side. Then she picked up the little wild boar's pair of pig trotters with her hand, and the little thing struggled even more happily. There are quite a few birds and beasts in this jungle every day. We have a good balance of meat and vegetables here. Why did you tie it here? It's too small. If you want to eat it, you have to wait until it grows up. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it, she suddenly said. Both of them came from the base and their ears had always been sharp. Besides, they had lived here together for so long. Before Feng Ling approached, Li Nanheng heard that it was her. He did not turn back but stood there and splashed water on his body. Hearing her words, the man looked back at her. If it were any other woman, he would have picked her up and said that he couldn't bear to eat or kill her. However, in her mouth, it became that even if he wanted to eat it, he had to wait until it grew older. Then I'll raise it before eating it. Raise? Who will raise it? You. Feng Ling pointed at herself and then at the little wild boar on the ground. Li Nanheng, it's enough to raise you. You still want me to raise a pig? Chapter 1246. Li Nanheng, it's enough to raise you alone. Why do you want me to raise a pig? There was nothing wrong with the second half of this sentence, but the first half made Li Nanheng's brows twitch and he stopped splashing water on his body. Then he suddenly smiled meaningfully and looked at her. Come here. Seeing the man's dangerous smile, Feng Ling's fingers were still hooking the front hooves of the little wild boar. Listening to the little pig's cries, she said firmly and decisively, No. Li Nanheng immediately squinted at her. Feng Ling continued to tease the little wild boar that was already crying anxiously. She was about to untie it when Li Nanheng walked up from the stream. The man's upper body was bare, and the trousers of his trousers were also wet, but it did not affect the man's handsome appearance at all. He walked over and said, If you dare to let her go, if I don't roast it tonight, I'll roast you and eat you. Feng Ling paused and rolled her eyes at him. Even if I bring a pile of wild boar meat and place it in front of you, you'll still eat me. You speak as though you'll let me sleep peacefully in bed one night. With that, she pointed to the little wild boar. And this is too small. It looks like it was born less than half a month ago. If you want to eat fresh and tender meat, you have to look at the size. This kind of meat is not fresh and tender. It's too tender. It's not delicious at all. Li Nanheng looked at her condescendingly and narrowed his eyes. Then do as I say. Raise it first and eat it when it grows up. The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched. I don't lack food. Why do I have to raise it? Even if humans live at the top of the food chain, they have feelings for it. How can they eat it? If you don't want to eat it, then raise it. It just so happens that I lack a living creature by my side. It can help you relieve your boredom. There are so many living creatures in this jungle. Why don't I catch a few non-poisonous snakes and let them sleep under our bed every day? Li Nanheng snorted, bent down to hold her chin, and decisively kissed her hard on the lips. When Feng Ling was kissed until she almost fell to the ground, he said hoarsely, Up to you. If you like such excitement, I'll accompany you. Excitement? The excitement of raising snakes under the bed? I shudder at the thought. Feng Ling quickly slapped his hand away. I don't want to raise you. I don't want to raise anyone else. Let this little wild boar go. Let's eat something else. The man saw that she insisted on letting it go and had no objection. Feng Ling quickly released the little wild boar's front hooves. The little thing howled twice and quickly turned around and jumped far away. This thing's running speed was not like that of poultry. Wild boars were born with fast speed. The reason why Feng Ling was fast was because when she was young she had to be fast in order to eat in the jungle. Otherwise she wouldn't be able to catch anything. You're not going to shower anymore? Seeing that the man did not take the little wild boar seriously and was about to kiss her again, she raised her hand to block him. I'm covered in sweat, Li Nanheng chuckled. He recalled that he had been busy for a long time in the morning and was covered in sweat. Her body was clean and emitted a fresh smell. He kissed her lips again, but this time he only tasted it lightly and did not go too deep. He turned and went back to the stream to take a shower. The stream was very shallow. Many places were only more than 10 centimeters deep. The deepest place was where he was standing, but it was barely up to the man's waist. The man stood there and leaned back leisurely. He picked up a blade of grass and held it in his mouth. Feng Ling watched for a while, walked over and deliberately splashed water on his head. The man did not dodge but teased, Why? Do you want to help your husband shower personally? What husband? Up until now, Feng Ling was too embarrassed to call him husband. This man kept calling her little wife every day. Furthermore, before she slept, she had asked him about it. The reason why Li Nanheng had never explained to her about marrying the cenotaph was because the Feng and Li families had an agreement. Within 3 years, no one could know that the Li family had married the Feng family's cenotaph. After all, this kind of thing was too unbelievable to outsiders. In order to respect a dead child and not let others spread rumors, he had to abide by this 3-year agreement. Within 3 years, he would not marry another woman and would not explain this strange marriage. However, this was only a verbal agreement between the two families. It was not like they were really married. Furthermore, to Li Nanheng, he only married a few pieces of clothes she had worn when she was young. However, he had been shamelessly calling her his little wife all day long, as if she had completely and utterly belonged to him. She splashed the water on his head again and looked at the old scars on his back that were not too obvious but could be seen. These scars were not ugly on his body. As a man who came out of 11 base, it was impossible for him not to have a few old scars on his body. People did not live in a fairy tale world. No one was perfect and invincible, and it was inevitable to have some injuries occasionally. However, the gunshot wound on the back of his shoulder. Feng Ling placed her hand on his gunshot wound. She had once used a dagger to help him remove the bullet here. At that time, the man was sweating in pain but did not make a sound. At that time, in Boston, he protected her in his arms and helped her block the bullet. Later, although he was clearly so weak, he still raised his gun and appeared when she was almost surrounded, like a god descending. Her fingers stroked there for a long time. The man saw that her hand did not leave and gently rubbed it repeatedly. He knew what she was thinking and raised his hand to press her hand there. If you want to help me bathe, come down and bathe together. Don't secretly take advantage of me. Who took advantage of you? Feng Ling patted his hand again and lowered her head to look at the grass in his mouth. You haven't smoked since you came here. Are you addicted to smoking again? The man didn't answer directly. He just casually leaned back, narrowed his eyes and looked at the fine light sprinkling down from the dense leaves above. He just responded with a shallow N. I saw that there were a few boxes in the travel bag you brought, but why haven't you smoked? The man curved his lips slightly and said leisurely, It's not safe to smoke in the jungle. After all, this is the place where you lived when you were young. It's too clean and has too many memories of you. It can't be polluted by any external things, not even second-hand smoke. W. For M. Chapter 1247. She knew that this man was usually so bad that it was impossible for him to have such a profound consciousness. But he really didn't smoke since he came here. Sometimes she saw men holding a blade of grass in their mouths. She had heard from some brothers in the base who wanted to quit smoking that men quitting smoking was like detoxification. Although it was not as painful, it was not good either. The way to relieve this discomfort was to put something in their mouth. It was good to eat some snacks. If there were no snacks, they would hold something to relieve their addiction, but she didn't know how long it would take to really quit. In the past, Li Nanheng did smoke a lot, and she occasionally told him to smoke less. It was okay to smoke but not too much. She was afraid that his body couldn't take it. Now in this clean and fresh jungle, after not smoking for several months, his lungs seemed to have been washed by the air several times. Feng Ling curved her lips slightly and hugged his neck from behind. As if rewarding him, she kissed his wet hair. After Feng Ling disappeared for 4 months, Li Nanheng also disappeared for half a year after temporarily leaving the base. However, before Boss Li left, he arranged a lot of things in the base. He also went back to the Li family to make sure that the elders were in good health and everything that he needed to worry about was taken care of before leaving. Therefore, this half a year was neither fast nor slow, and there weren't many troublesome matters. Occasionally, there were some problems that needed Boss Li to deal with and make a decision himself. The base hall couldn't get through to him, so they could only send him a message. However, after the message was sent, it would take a few days for Li Nanheng to reply. There was almost no signal in the jungle. Occasionally, there would be some weak signals when they walked a little further away. There was a solar charger developed by the United Nations Science and Technology Museum in 11 Base, so the power of his cell phone could last a long time. However, because there was nothing troublesome, Li Nanheng didn't touch his cell phone most of the time. After all, he still had the Li family and the base behind him, so he couldn't really leave them alone. Occasionally, he would take a few minutes to reply to messages and deal with problems. Half a year ago, it was still the transition season between spring and summer, and in the blink of an eye, it was almost winter. However, because Li Nanheng was here, Feng Ling didn't have to sit by the fire every day. The cabin was warm and comfortable every day. Feng Ling watched as the man returned with his phone and knew that he had gone to find a place with a signal to reply to a message. She supported her chin with one hand and leaned against the window of the cabin. She watched the man's tall and straight figure and thought about how the two of them had unknowingly spent half a year here. For half a year they didn't separate from each other at all times. This kind of time was something that they had never experienced before, but it was also so short that it made people wonder if life was really fleeting. How come it's been half a year? It was true that she had left for too long. She had enough time to rest and recuperate, but she couldn't bear to part with this place. She couldn't bear to part with Li Nanheng every day and night, and she couldn't bear to part with this home they had built bit by bit. As time dragged on, winter came in the blink of an eye. Li Nanheng walked back to the cabin and was about to throw the phone back on the bed when he saw that Feng Ling was holding her own phone. She hadn't touched her phone in months. "Help me charge my phone too," she said. Li Nanheng glanced at her. "What are you doing?" "In a few months after this winter, the weather will warm up. Let's go back." Feng Ling raised her phone. "Before I go back, I have to restore contact with my old friends and take the time to answer their various questions. Otherwise, when we go back one day, I'll probably be drowned by their questions and saliva. If you don't want to go back, you don't have to force yourself to go back." "How can I not want to go back? I just came out for a few months on vacation. It's not like I want to be out of touch with this world." Feng Ling placed her phone on the bed. "And it's impossible to live in such a place for the rest of your life, unless you're completely carefree. But how can you be carefree in this world? Even people like me who have no family since I was young, have responsibilities that I have to shoulder, let alone you." Feng Ling put her phone on the bed. Li Nanheng looked at her and did not say anything. He walked over, picked up her phone, glanced at it and then looked at her. "Are you willing?" "Of course." Feng Ling also looked at him seriously. "Besides, I haven't officially married you yet. Don't tell me you really plan to use the reason of marrying my cenotaph to make me your wild wife in this deep mountain forest? I don't even have a proper marriage process. I'm afraid I won't be able to die in peace." Li Nanheng chuckled. "Just because of this? What else do you want?" Feng Ling tilted her head and glared at him. "All right, I'll get married when I go back. I'll marry you first." The man nodded and helped her connect her phone to the solar charger. He then reached out and hugged the little woman who was becoming more and more intimate with him. He let her sit on his lap. "You can only be tied to me for the rest of your life. After all, I made a vow in front of the Feng family's 2 elders and the Li family's 4 elders." Feng Ling had never heard of his vow, but from this sentence she could guess how much this man had done for her after knowing that she was the Feng family's 2nd daughter. She asked, "What vow did you make in front of them?" The man's cold brows moved slightly. Even though there was no one around except for the birds and beasts in the jungle, he still bent down and whispered a few words into her ear. When she suddenly heard this man say that he would never marry anyone except the 2nd daughter of the Feng family, her face instantly heated up. She raised her hand to slap his face away, but the man held her head and kissed her. He turned around and pressed her down on the bed. Los Angeles, the Feng family. Bang! In the hall of the Feng family, Tang Sankai was almost knocked down by old Madame Feng. She stood in place in shock, looking at Feng Mingzhu and Qinqiu who were arguing inside. The servants rushed forward to support the expensive Tang Sankai and old Madame Feng. At this time, Grandfather Feng also entered the door. Seeing the situation inside, he immediately frowned. "What happened?" Feng Mingzhu abruptly turned her eyes and saw her grandfather and grandmother who had entered the door. Her eyes, which were already red from crying, instantly turned even redder. She clenched her fists tightly. "Tell me, how long have you known?" Qin Xiu was still glaring at her. For the first time, Qin Xiu, who had been used to speaking gently and softly to her daughter, spoke to her in such an attitude. Her eyes were even redder than Feng Mingzhu's. W. For M. Chapter 1248. What's wrong? Why are you arguing here? Grandfather Feng suddenly shouted. At the same time he saw a stack of documents on the coffee table. He narrowed his eyes and walked over. When Grandfather Feng was about to touch the stack of documents, Feng Mingzhu suddenly reached out and grabbed them as if she had been electrocuted. She messed up the documents and scattered them on the ground. She didn't want them to see them. Seeing her action, Qin Xiu was so angry that her eyes turned red and her forehead twitched. "Mingzhu, that's your sister." Before Grandfather Feng could figure out what was going on, he abruptly raised his old but bright eyes to look at Qin Xiu. "What?" At this moment, Grandmother Feng walked over tremblingly with the help of a servant. She looked at Feng Mingzhu and Qin Xiu in shock. "When you two were arguing just now, you said that my poor little granddaughter was still alive. She was still alive, right? Did I hear wrong?" Feng Mingzhu had obtained the second DNA report of Feng Ling a long time ago. After checking it, she threw it into the safe. After so long, she almost forgot about it. This morning, she asked her mother to help her go back to her room to get something from the safe, but she saw it. Although Qin Xiu had long guessed that Feng Ling was her daughter, after all, Feng Ling didn't seem to want to go home. Besides, Feng Ling looked very peaceful and happy in 11 base. She only wanted to see her daughter happy. Although she wanted to acknowledge her, she couldn't bear to disturb her, so she didn't pursue the matter. Although she thought about it every day, she didn't dare to acknowledge her. However, when she suddenly saw this DNA report, the truth that Feng Ling was her second daughter was completely revealed to her. Most importantly, this DNA report was in Mingzhu's safe. This meant that she had long known about Feng Ling, but for so long she had remained silent at home. In the past 10 months, she had changed from an ignorant and incompetent young lady to someone who had frequently come into contact with the affairs of the Feng family's major companies and was working hard to take over the inheritance of the Feng family. Qin Xiu thought that her eldest daughter had grown up after those things. She didn't expect that this was the reason. She was furious. She even hated her daughter for failing to live up to her expectations. This child was actually worried that her sister would be recognized one day. She was afraid that everything would be taken away or everything would be taken away. She was so sensitive that even after knowing the truth, she did not say a word. She had been quietly hiding this fact. That was why Qin Xiu took advantage of the time when there was no one at home to look for Feng Mingzhu. Coincidentally, Feng Mingzhu had just returned from the company and drank some wine outside, but she was not very drunk. As soon as she entered the door, she was stopped by Qin Xiu. Qin Xiu threw the DNA report and all the documents about Feng Ling on the coffee table and asked her what she thought. At that time, Feng Mingzhu was stunned for a moment. Her eyes first turned from confusion to panic, and then from panic to coldness. In the end, the mother and daughter quarreled. Qin Xiu's disappointment and question, as well as Feng Mingzhu's anger and sharp voice, were heard by the old madam who had entered the door a few minutes earlier. Then Grandfather Feng entered the door. As if knowing that she couldn't hide it anymore, Feng Mingzhu looked at the messy documents and DNA report on the coffee table and asked in a shrill voice, "So what if she's alive? I haven't had any family for 20 years. So what if she's alive? I'm your granddaughter, I'm your daughter. I'm your beloved. Even if she's still alive, she won't come back. What else do you have to worry about?" Qin Xiu was furious. She had never thought of forcing Feng Ling to return to this family, but Mingzhu actually looked at all of this from such a twisted perspective. Fortunately, there was a servant to support her. She couldn't believe it. She raised her hand in disbelief, trembled, and then put it down. "She's alive. She's really alive. My little granddaughter is still alive." Grandfather Feng was also excited, but after all, he was old and had seen decades of storms. Back then, he could withstand the news that his granddaughter had died at the bottom of the sea. How could he not be able to withstand it now? He looked at Feng Mingzhu's red eyes, then at Qin Xiu, and then at the documents on the floor. He turned his head and gave a look to the helper next to him. The helper only dared to go up and pick up the papers after receiving the old man's order. "If you dare to pick them up, tear them all. Tear them all." Feng Mingzhu shouted angrily. She regretted it. If she had known, she would have torn these things up and destroyed them all. Back then, she only felt that it was necessary to keep these things. After all, if she wanted to do something in the future, it might be very troublesome to check them again, so she simply hid them in the safe. She didn't expect that they would become a time bomb now. Grandfather Feng was the head of the family. The servant didn't dare to look at her. She hurriedly picked up the things and tidied them up. When she saw the contents of the documents, she quickly controlled the excited expression on her face and quickly handed them to Grandfather Feng. Grandmother Feng rushed over and stood by the elder's side, watching him flip through them one by one. When she saw all the information about Feng Ling, including Feng Ling's photo, and the contents of the DNA test report, Grandmother Feng was so excited that she suddenly snatched the document with Feng Ling's photo. She stared at the short-haired but calm smile on the girl's face. She raised her trembling hand and carefully touched it. Tears fell. "This is my little granddaughter." The servants were also excited. After all, they were all old servants of the Feng family. After the second miss was born, they also took care of the child for an entire year. The death of this child was a huge blow to the entire Feng family. Now that this child was still alive, everyone was very excited. Seeing their excited expressions, Feng Mingzhu's eyes were filled with a destructive blow. She staggered back, looked at the things in their hands, and then turned to look at Qin Qiu, who was holding her chest in anger. "Mom, you knew it long ago. Did you know it but you didn't say it? Now you're blaming me?" Qin Qiu took a deep breath and suddenly raised her hand to slap her. "I didn't say it because I respected her choice. I didn't want to disturb her current peace. I just wanted her to live happily outside. But you hid these things and refused to say it. You know why? W. For M." Chapter 1249. Since she was born, she had never been slapped by her mother. This sudden slap caused Feng Mingzhu to stagger back. She looked at her grandparents, who suddenly raised their eyes to look at her. She saw the excitement in their eyes and the flash of surprise. Mingzhu already knew? Grandfather Feng's hands trembled as he held the documents, but his voice was directed at Feng Mingzhu. "Why didn't you tell me?" Feng Mingzhu bit her lips and looked at them coldly. Qin Qiu was so angry that she clutched her chest and sat on the sofa. Grandmother Feng was still very agitated. She kept staring at the girl in the photo and then raised her eyes to look at them. "Where is this child now? Where is she?" Grandfather Feng lowered his head to continue reading the documents in his hands. As he read, he said, "There's information here. Her name is Feng Ling. This is in 11 base." Grandfather Feng's expression suddenly froze. He whispered in surprise, "She's in Li Nanheng's place?" The two old men gathered together and kept looking at the documents as though they couldn't wait to see a living person in front of them. As Grandfather Feng finished reading all the documents, he could no longer maintain his composure. He asked Qin Qiu anxiously, "Xiao Qiu, have you seen this child?" Qin Qiu's anger eased a little. She moved her hand away from her chest and said softly, "It's a coincidence. When I accompanied my mother out to buy things, my mother's bag was stolen by a robber. It was Feng Ling who passed by and helped snatch the bag back. Just like that, we met for the first time." Qin Qiu briefly told him what had happened and then said, "When I first found out that her surname was Feng, I didn't think much about it. Later, when I guessed that she might be my daughter, I remembered the small jade pendant she had been wearing since she was born. There was a Feng character engraved on it. I guess someone made her use this surname because of her jade pendant." The more Grandmother Feng listened, the more agitated she became. Even though it was already dark outside, she still turned her head to look out. As she looked, she held her old man's hand tightly. "Old man, let's go see her. Let's go bring our little granddaughter back." Hearing that they were going to bring her back now, Feng Mingzhu glared at them angrily. "Bring her back? Are you sure you want to bring her back? We don't even know if she wants to return to the Feng family. You're going to pick her up just like this?" Sensing Feng Mingzhu's anger, the two elders of the Feng family looked at her again. Grandfather Feng looked at her. "Mingzhu, what are you angry about? That's your sister, your biological sister. When you were young, you heard that your little sister fell into the sea. At that time, didn't you cry? Don't you remember that when you were young, you often kissed her in swaddling clothes? We're of the same blood. Why?" Feng Mingzhu sneered. "If you were me, would you be happy?" Grandfather Feng paused and looked at her. After all, she was his granddaughter. No matter how many unreasonable things she had done, he would never think of her from a dark angle. He didn't think about how sensitive she was at this moment. He just looked at her and couldn't understand why she looked so determined, as if she would sever ties with the Feng family as long as they dared to bring Feng Ling back. Enough. Do you still want the whole family to see your dark thoughts? Qin Xiu suddenly scolded her and turned to glare at Feng Mingzhu. Go back to your room and think about what you did wrong. I was wrong. Feng Mingzhu's face was still red. She chuckled softly, but her voice was cold and her voice was sharp and full of anger. Mom, I wasn't the one who threw my child into the sea. You're the sinner of the Feng family. I'm not. Why should I be wrong? What did I do wrong? Qin Xiu's face instantly turned pale because of her words. She looked at her eldest daughter in disbelief. Bastard. What nonsense are you talking about? Grandfather Feng suddenly said angrily. Mingzhu, apologize to your mother. Feng Mingzhu didn't speak. She just looked at Qin Xiu's pale face, then at old Madame Feng, who couldn't hide her nervousness and excitement because of the news of her little granddaughter, and then at Grandfather Feng, who was glaring at her. Look. She just found out that her sister was not dead. She just found out that Feng Ling was still alive. Now the whole family was on the verge of ganging up on her. If Feng Ling was really brought back one day, half of the Feng family's daughter's name would be given to her. Everything that belonged to her since she was young would be taken away by the person who should have died long ago. Perhaps they would compensate her more because of their guilt towards Feng Ling. Perhaps they would even ask her, as her sister, to give in to her and endure some grievances. In short, as long as Feng Ling was still alive in this world, it would be a devastating blow to her. I asked you to apologize, but you're still glaring at me? Grandfather Feng finally saw the seriousness of the matter from Feng Mingzhu's resentful expression. He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, Just now, your mother said that you already knew that these DNA and information were investigated by yourself. After knowing the results, you didn't tell anyone? You didn't want your sister to come back? Old Madame Feng also looked at her in disbelief. Mingzhu, how could you bear to let your sister wander outside? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't I say anything? Feng Mingzhu opened her mouth, but she stood there quietly. Her eyes were a little empty, and her voice was flat and emotionless. Only a sneer could be seen on her lips, but it also flashed past. That's right. Why didn't I say what I was afraid of? Qin Xiu looked at her expression as if she had been hit. Although she was angry, she couldn't bear to see her trapped in that dilemma. She frowned and said, Mingzhu, you're no longer a child. You understand the logic very well. You've all grown up. Even if Feng Ling returns to the Feng family, no one will compete with you for the love of the elders. Besides, you know how the Feng family does things. Even if she comes back, the family won't be biased. You're still the apple of the Feng family's eye. Everything you want will still belong to you. Put down those knots in your heart. Whether she wants to come back or not, you have to get along well with her, okay? All right. Feng Mingzhu raised her chin slightly, the emotions in her eyes still unclear. If she really comes back, I will definitely get along well with her. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.